What's up, hockey fans? Happy Canada Day. This is Free Agency Frenzy. I'm Michael Traikos. That's Ryan Kennedy. We are live from Rooston Sports headquarters in historic Brantford, Ontario. Ryan, this is the day one of free agency, and yet it feels like all the news happened yesterday and the day before.
A lot of action got taken care of, and not only do we see some big re-signings, but we also saw some big sign and trades or trade and signs. Sign and trades.
Sign and trades.
Yeah. So Mitch Marner, the biggest name on the market this year, or at least we assumed he was, and it certainly turned out that way. Now a member of the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, Toronto Maple Leafs lose a big one. I believe he's like fifth highest scorer in franchise history, and he's gone out the door to the Vegas Golden Knights. Toronto does get something in return. They got a third-line center in Nicholas Roy, probably more than they thought they'd probably get when you thought about Marner just walking out the door. Theoretically, could have gone out for nothing. So to recoup something for Marner, how big of a get is that?
Well, it's nice for Toronto. I mean, Nicholas Roy, obviously a Stanley Cup champion, very good shutdown forward, has a lot of great size to him as well. So, yeah, you get something. It's not just like a fifth-round pick or something, where we've seen that in the past with the sign and trades, where it's basically like, we'll give you a bit of a sweetener so that we can talk to this guy earlier.
Right.
And so, yeah, and Vegas, obviously, they're in a position now where, obviously terrible news about Alex Pietrangelo, where he's probably going to miss the entire season, if not more, due to multiple surgeries that he needs to have done. And he's really stepping away from hockey. So that's a big void for the Golden Knights. It also does open up cap space, which helps them acquire Marner in the first place. But, you subtract his salary, it makes it a little bit easier. For Toronto, I think it's a really good fit because if you looked at their bottom six, particularly in the playoffs, they were really ineffective for the most part. And they didn't have a lot of definition, I find. Like, there's a couple of guys in the Leafs where it's like, what would you say you do here in honor of office space? But with Nicholas Roy, you know exactly what he brings to the table, and he does it at a fairly high level. So a nice little get there. And obviously for Vegas, Mitch Marner can get you 100 points.
Yeah, the Leafs have been looking for that third line center for a while. And initially that's why they got Scott Laughton at the deadline. So now you're looking at, a 1-2-3 punch where you've got Austin Matthews, obviously. The Leafs re-signed John Tavares, a nice contract, 4 years, $4.38 million. He's your second line center. And now you got Nicholas Roy, as well as Steven Lorentz is probably, factoring into your fourth line. He got extended at 3 years, 1.35. The big acquisition for the Leafs, aside from re-signing Matthew Nyes for 6 years, getting Matthias Machelli from Utah. We're already jokingly calling him Matthias Marner. He probably will end up maybe seeing some time with Austin Matthews on that top line, maybe even just to start. What did you make of this? Because a playmaker coming in who, this year didn't have the greatest year, but you look back at the previous year, and this was a guy that you're thinking, okay, he could be a nice little surprise, like another Michael Bunting for Toronto.
Yeah, when that trade went down, I was like, ooh, that's a nice one, because you look at Utah, and Machelli had just kind of fallen out of favor and kind of lost his spot because he needs to be a top six guy, right? He's an excellent playmaker, but you figure, he was already playing sort of more of a middle to bottom six role with what are now the Mammoth. And then they add JJ Peterka on the wing.
Right.
So where would he have fit in? And you have Dylan Guenther, who's continuing to rise as a young NHLer, and obviously Clayton Keller is their biggest winger. So, Utah, and Daniel Boot is coming into Utah as well. So he's another young player that they're going to want to get into their top six, or at least their middle six.
Again, do you think he maybe?
No, he missed all last year with injury.
Okay.
So I think he's going to need a year. I mean, hey, unless he just did some amazing training. Yeah. But I think he needs.
He is an Iginla, right?
He is, but I think more development time would behoove him. But with Machelli, I think something people might not remember is that when he first came into the league, he was really good really early. And there was a point where I think he had more points than Connor Bedard, and he was certainly in a position where it was like, oh, maybe he's going to be the Calder winner. Then he got hurt, and that sort of put the end to that. But he is a really great passer and somebody who's developed really nicely since he was originally drafted. And he was sort of a depth draft pick at the time. He was a bit of a sleeper pick for then Arizona. So for the Leafs, yeah, like try him with Matthews, try him with Tavares, and see if there's some magic there. Like I said, he's a great playmaker. So you figure, I mean, Matthews, we know he can score, and Tavares isn't too shabby himself. So, you know.
Yeah, he got 40 assists 2 years ago, and that was a team where Arizona, or I guess it was Arizona at the time, Arizona's leading scorer was Clayton Keller with 33 goals. So, you know, if he can get 40 assists with a 30-goal score, what can he do if Matthews ends up with 50 to 60 goals?
Totally.
Yeah. So I like it. It's probably maybe a stretch to think that he's going to be a top line guy for the entire season. But you know, it's been a weird start to free agency or the offseason for Toronto, because you look around them in the Atlantic, and obviously Florida was able to re-sign all three guys. And we were talking about this multiple times on the big show is, you know, will they be able to bring back Bennett? Okay. Will they be able to bring back Bennett and Ekblad? All right, well, bring back those two guys and Marchand, and they did it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, you know, if you want to blame the tax-free state of Florida or just a great organization that Bill Zito has kind of created there in Florida. You know, hats off to the Florida Panthers, because they're already going into this season looking better than they did at this time last year. Like, they're going in with Seth Jones and Marchand, whereas last year, they had lost Montour, they had lost Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and they had lost Anthony Stolarz, who, you know, was a guy that, you know, was
turned out to be a great goaltender.
Yeah, you know what? If he doesn't get hurt in that second round, we might be talking Toronto Maple Leafs as the, you know, on the cover of our Champions edition of the Hockey News.
Fresh off the printing press. Cop it now, folks. All your champions, every league, everywhere in the world.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we're going to be live with you for the next 3 hours. We're going to be joined by David Alter of the Toronto Maple Leafs site at some point. Hopefully, we'll see how busy he is down at Maple Leafs headquarters there. What are you looking at Toronto in terms of other house cleaning that they need to do? Are they set with what they've done so far, Ryan, or are you looking at maybe some more additions to either the bottom six, or, you know, it doesn't look like they need anything on the back end?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you're losing a 100-point guy in Mitch Marner, you would think to yourself, like, okay, well, there's definitely more that needs to be done. They kind of have some X factors, right? So Nick Robertson would be one. Like, if you give Nick Robertson a bunch of minutes on a top line, will he produce?
Oh boy.
Okay, that's a question. Certainly, I'm not saying it's a yes.
Been asking for like 4 years, though.
Right. So maybe that question has already been answered. But you also have Easton Cowan, who is now going to be turning pro.
Right.
You know, just won a Memorial Cup with London. Had a tremendous success in junior. Last year looked like he was not ready whatsoever for the pros. I mean, he's a smaller player. He was drafted during the Kyle Dubas, Wes Clark era, so obviously that was the case.
Small and skilled.
But now, you know, you got another year under your belt. He's going to have a whole summer where he can train, you know, put on even more muscle to his frame. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, Easton Cowan, we know he's super skilled. Can he produce on a top six line or amongst the top six forwards? Now, again, huge X factor, and I'm not saying it will hold, but if you're the Leafs and, you know, I mean, cap space is always a concern based on some of the guys they're already paying. And I will say Tavares, that was even less than I thought would be great for the Leafs. I thought, like, if they could get him for 5, that would be incredible. They got him for less than 5. So that's great for them, especially with the cap continuing to go up.
I thought the money that they saved on Tavares would naturally go to a Bennett or a Marchand.
Right.
When you look at what Marchand signed for, it was 6 years and $4 million?
Something like that.
I thought they were going to go, you know, maybe you can take them to 8.
Right.
And go 8 times 4.
Yeah. And maybe they had that intention, but then obviously Marchand re-signed with Florida. But at least you got Matthew Nyes taken care of, because as the playoffs went on, I think his ticket went up.
Yeah.
And so you get him for under 8. I think that's a pretty solid one as well. So I don't know if the Leafs are done, but I could see them going into the season with about this lineup and see what shakes out in training camp. Like, do you get a somebody on their rookie deal like an Easton Cowan, or somebody that doesn't make a lot of money like a Nick Robertson step up, and they're not going to get you 100 points, but if they get you 65 or so, maybe that's okay because of some of the other guys you got.
All right. Well, we've got our social media guru here, Jared Ostroff. Jared, you got some news here. What's making news on X?
All right, we got a couple little things. So let's start off with the first UFA signing of 2025 free agency that officially came after the 12 o'clock deadline, which of course is Christian Dvorak of the Montreal Canadiens, who mostly played in third, fourth line role. Elliot Friedman first kind of tweeted out that it was 1 year, $4.5 million, which seemed rich, until he corrected it and said, no, it's $5.4 million for 1 year. Then we have an update on Nikolai Ehlers. Apparently he's not making his decision today. That's one of the big names on our board. So scratch his name off for today at least. And last but not least, Glenn Gulletson is officially now head coach of the Dallas Stars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Ryan, like when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs roster right now, obviously they lose Marner, and they got some money to spend. We'll see what they spend. Are you looking at them as a player for a Brock Besser or Nikolai Ehlers, someone on this year, or like you said, do they just rely on some of the youngsters and say, you know what, let's just save this cap space because next year you could break the bank on some of the bigger names out there?
Connor McDavid?
I'm just saying, he might be available. Probably not.
Everything's out. You never know. It might be on the table. It will be interesting to see, because Ehlers and Besser are obviously the big targets for a lot of teams as scoring wingers. I think I was talking about this during the regular season when we were thinking ahead to free agency, that Nikolai Ehlers might be a good replacement for Marner, where, again, it's not 1-to-1. Ehlers is not a 100-point guy, but, he's not far off of that. And again, what could he do on Matthew's wing or Tavares' wing? So it'll be interesting, because free agency, you can make a lot of mistakes. You can overpay. And what did we learn from the Florida Panthers, which was you can get really good players at the deadline, and obviously everything's prorated, so it doesn't cause as much at the cap as it would if you have the player the whole time. So I think the Leafs are in a spot where they can be a little bit cautious. And hey, if you get Ehlers on a good deal at a good price, I say go for it. But if you're seeing that market for him and Besser really creep up, and that number creep up to something you're not comfortable with, I wouldn't be worried about having to overpay. I think you look at the options you have, and then once you get to the season, if you say, okay, well, we need more scoring punch, that's when you go out and say, all right, well, what can we do on the trade market?
Yeah, Toronto Maple Leafs, like they win the division last year, and they're probably going to take a step back just based on what we're looking at the roster, but more importantly, what we're looking at from teams around them. And we talked about the Florida Panthers and them being able to bring back basically the championship roster. It looks like a team that is destined for a three-peat, or at least has put themselves in position where they could three-peat. Are they the best team in the Atlantic right now in your mind?
It really feels like it.
I don't know what they're missing.
And that's the thing, is like they figured out the formula where they don't have to kill themselves in the regular season to get home ice advantage. Like they didn't have home ice advantage the entire playoffs. And they're like, whatever, that's fine. Yeah. Like, we'll dust off teams in 5. They went to game 7 once.
Yeah.
And that was in a series against Toronto where they blew the Leafs out twice. So I kind of feel like they know the drill. And I was worried about the rate of attrition this year in the playoffs. I thought they would be fine early, right? I know a lot of people pick Tampa. I picked Florida because I'm like, if they get tired, it's not going to be right away. Yeah. It would be down the line. And I think what we saw was like Matthew Tkachuk in particular, he was really hurt early on, but then they played for so long that I'm not saying he healed, but it's almost like he just got the injury into a place where he was comfortable enough that the Stanley Cup final was his best series of the 4 series they played. So you don't want to be in that kind of shape when you're making another long playoff run. But at least with Florida, you know, they know the drill. They know when they need to take it easy on off days. Now, they won't have the advantage of a super fresh Brad Marchand, a super fresh Seth Jones. But, you know, they'll have Mackie Samoskevich, who could take a good role amongst the forwards. And that's a young guy. That's the thing. They don't have a lot of young players. That would be the only disadvantage they have, is like there's a lot of mileage on that team. But I'm at the point now where I wouldn't bet against them because it feels like they've figured out the game plan.
No, I agree. And the one benefit from last year, like you said, is they got a Seth Jones at the deadline. They got a Marchand at the deadline. And they had a couple players like Tkachuk who basically shut it down after the 4 Nations. That helps, you know, when you got that many miles on your body, like having guys who haven't been part of that previous run, it does help. So that's the one thing that they won't have this year. But, you know, it's hard to pick another team that's looking better than them right now. We'll see what Tampa does. We'll see if Montreal makes any big moves. But, you know, for what it's worth, I still see Toronto and the 2 Florida teams as the top 3 teams. Obviously, Ottawa's right behind there. They were able to re-sign Claude Giroux. But, yeah, the Atlantic Division for me, and even Detroit, like, you know, getting Jordan Gibson puts them in a spot where I'm thinking, okay, well, if they didn't get a wild card last year, they probably should get one this year because they were just, you know, basically 4 wins away from that. Or 5 wins away. Or
that's actually points. 4 points. I was going to say 4 wins away is actually a lot.
Yeah.
But it is going to be really interesting because Montreal gets Noah Dobson in a trade.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, if you're the Habs, you have Noah Dobson and Lane Hudson. So, and, you know, we were talking about this on the draft day live frenzy after day 1 of the draft, that, you know, you can have one of those guys on basically for 2/3, 3/4 of the game. You will always have a puck mover who can give the other team fits when either Dobson or Hudson are lugging the puck up the ice, something they both do incredibly well. So that's a big advantage for Montreal. Now, can they maintain that magic they had post 4 Nations? That to me is the big question. Like, have we seen a new Nick Suzuki that will sustain throughout 82 games? Like, is Nick Suzuki now legitimately an 85-point player and a 2-way beast, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So in that case, you know, we talked about they need a number 2 center. It feels like with Kirby Dach, like the injuries and the inconsistency are just too much to keep him in that. But at the same time, like, what if Kirby Dach like is healthy and gets it all together? Then you got a pretty good weapon there. I mean, he's still young and he's a big dude. So I don't know.
I love how we're always talking about Kirby Dach and is he going to get it together? Is he going to stay healthy?
Yeah.
It's like, it's like the same Nick Robertson question. It's
right.
Like, if it hasn't happened, why do we keep expecting it to happen one of these days?
We are Lindsey Buckingham on What's Up With That.
Yeah.
Saturday Night Sketch.
When is he going to?
Kirby Dach is like, oh, I'm sorry. You thought it was going to be healthy and play 82 games and score 70 points. Maybe next time. But maybe this is the time. That's why we keep coming back and sitting on that couch.
So we're trying to get David Alter here because he's live in Toronto at Leafs headquarters.
Oh, here we go.
Here, how's it going, guys?
Good. There he is. Can you hear us, David?
I can hear you guys loud and clear, and I see myself in the feed.
Cannot hear us.
Mr. Traikos.
Well, we cannot
Mr.
hear
Kennedy.
him. Oh, now I hear connected.
David, you there?
I am here. I hear you guys.
Excellent. He says he's here.
All right, you're going to have to talk to Dave because I cannot hear him.
All right. So, David, let's start off. The big news, the Mitch Marner trade, Nicholas Wallace coming back, but just your thoughts. I mean, this is something that was kind of telegraphed for a while, but now that it has actually happened, your thoughts on the post-Marner Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as much as anyone else is. We've always talked about the core four, core five players with the Toronto Maple Leafs for the last 8, 9 years or now, or I guess 6 or 7 if you include John Tavares in that, right? So now with a huge piece of that gone, how do the Maple Leafs shift? Do they look a lot different? Do they replace them by committee? Where are they going to make up that offense from? Are they better in the playoffs as a result of it? Is it addition by subtraction? There's so much to kind of figure out. We all kind of telegraphed this move was going to come at some point or another, but now that it's happened, it's going to set in for a bit that this is a big loss for the franchise, and it's not going to be easy for them to try and replace.
Some of those possibilities could be on the wing to replace, obviously not all of that offense, but at least some of it. And, there are some names out on the market, Nikolai Ehlers, Brock Besser. Those guys are going to be heavily recruited by a number of teams. So I'm wondering, and, these are big X factors, so you can tell me, maybe you pour water on it right away. There's Nick Robertson, there's Easton Cowan, and then they did trade for Matthias Machelli from Utah. Can you see Toronto being, I guess, satisfied right now, or do you think they need to go big game hunting in the next couple of days for a scoring winger?
I think there's a couple of different approaches the Maple Leafs are going to take on this. They have, last I checked, it was about 6 million, just a little under 6 million in cap space. There is talk that they're looking at moving Calle Yarncroke and Dave Kampf, and the reason why that didn't happen until today is because of the signing bonuses that are attached to both of those players. So you look at that, move up some space. Do you run the risk of overpaying what's out there just for the sake of what's out there? Or is there a better opportunity to weaponize that additional cap space and free up a problem for another team closer to the end of the summer? So I would be shocked if the Leafs overpay for whoever's out there, just because this is not really the year. There's a lot on the table in terms of what's available in the free agent market next year. And the Leafs defense and goaltending is pretty much locked in. So outside of the buy low acquisitions, I could see the Leafs being patient here, which would be a very different approach. And the one thing we've seen from Brad Treliving since Brendan Shanahan has not been the guy that he's reporting to is that there's been more patience and value in some of these deals. And so I would be surprised if the Leafs do anything big for big game hunting. Not to say it wouldn't happen. Obviously, Nick Ehlers is the big one out there and would help in terms of some of the offense, but the price might be a bit too much. And then, of course, there's going to be term that it might just be better to kind of just play the long game and be patient instead of go big for today. Although I'm now seeing that Brock Besser is just extending in Vancouver. So, there's a lot of stuff on the board. It looks like just players that are just going to kind of remain with their teams. It's going to be a very interesting day, but I'd be surprised if the Leafs are very noisy.
And you kind of touched on it there, is when it comes to depth moves and shoring up the lineup, we were talking about the bottom six, and for me, they kind of lacked definition in the playoffs. But now you get Nicholas Waugh coming in from Vegas. He is definitely a very specific shutdown player. He can kill penalties. He's got great size. Steven Lorentz was re-signed already. Do you see any other little moves in the bottom six, or do you think they're satisfied with what they have right now?
I do think they're going to try to get somebody else, someone who can be a middle six, perhaps like a big top six guy that could help them in that regard. It's interesting because they have so much depth at that bottom six position now. It's a lot of why they didn't extend the qualifying offer to someone like Pontus Holmberg, just because with Arbrights, it was likely he was going to get an award that was going to be too high for the Leafs to want to commit to when they've got a lot of these other players in their bottom six that they just committed to. So I think, if you were asking me and the price was right and they had to kind of go in the market, getting another 2-3 C player that you can move Max Domi over to the wing permanently would be the big get for the Maple Leafs if they can kind of swing it between now and the end of the year. We know that John Tavares, while he's a 2C now, we don't know if he's going to remain in that role over the course of the long term, and what they get in that regard can change a lot of that. So there's a lot of shuffling, but there's a lot of guys that can play wing and play center and some flexibility that we'll see what they do in that regard. But that's a lot of why Holmberg wasn't back.
Excellent. And before we let you go, Dave, Matthew Knies signs an extension. Seemed to be a pretty good price. Your thoughts on the term, the cap hit, and what Knies will bring to the team next year after a pretty prolific season in 2024-25?
Yeah, well, I think the term is the big win for the Maple Leafs here, because we all knew when you look at what JJ Peterka was getting for comparable numbers, age, all that stuff on the wing, that Matthew Knies was in line for a big payday. And 6 years is a lot. Like it gives you some runtime that if he has a bad year or two, or he's trying to progress, that there's more time for him to kind of get to that ceiling. I'm curious how he's going to do on that first line without Mitch Marner there, if that affects his numbers. And then I'm curious to see if Matthew Knies has more to grow, because this is a player that really didn't score at this level anywhere else in his career. So I looked at this year as, is this an aberration, or is Matthew Knies a star? And so the Leafs are making a big bet that the term is going to be worth figuring that out for that number. And it would have been a big loss if someone would have come out and outright offer sheeted him. But I don't think that was really ever like a real option. I think the Maple Leafs knew that the number was right for someone like Knies. It was just a matter of getting some control, and getting him for 6 years was certainly the way to kind of go about that. So you look at Knies, you look at Tavares, the two that they're committed for, it's just 1.37% more than it was for the two players combined last year. It's a pretty big win for the Maple Leafs to get both of those guys at that comfortable number while still trying to fill out their roster with Mitch Marner gone.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for this, David. And everybody go to our Toronto Maple Leafs team site today to keep up with all the comings and goings with the Buds. And have a good one, man. Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, you got it, guys. Thank you.
One guy that the Toronto Maple Leafs will not be getting is Brock Besser. Jared, you've got some news with the Vancouver Canucks and Brock Besser.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had Minnesota native Brock Besser returning home to go play for the Minnesota Wild. Instead, he's staying home for 7 years with the Vancouver Canucks at $7.25 million. And one last little one. $5.6 million.
So Eklund is very interesting because he's really starting to come into his own. And we know the Sharks have been rebuilding. They've been pretty terrible the past couple of years by design.
Yeah.
But now you figure Macklin Celebrini had a fantastic rookie season. You know, Will Smith really came on in the second half. They had a great draft. You know, you get Michael Misa second overall. They got Simon Wang in the second round. He's more of a raw, 4 or 5 years down the road. But Sam Dickinson, coming off a fantastic junior season, so he could join their blue line, if not this year, as in 2025-26, then the year after that.
Mm-hmm.
But William Eklund, I feel like he's a player that, because the Sharks don't get a lot of press, people really have been talking about the fact that he had a very nice season as well for San Jose.
Sure.
So now that young core is starting to come together, where I still think they'll be bad this year, but they will be building something and they'll be going in the right direction.
Ryan, they look like 2016 era Toronto Maple Leafs, where you've got Matthews, Marner, Nylander, you had Connor Brown, you had Kasperi Kapanen, you had Zach Hyman. You just had a lot of young guys, and you're going, oh my God, if even half these guys develop the way they think they should, this has got the makings of just forget about championship core because it didn't work out,
right?
But a fun group to watch.
Certainly fun.
And you mentioned it. You got Celebrini, you got Will Smith. Now you got Michael Misa coming to the table. and they haven't spent anything under the cap. Like when you look at it, like you and I were joking before this free agency frenzy started, and in the NBA, SGA, who's from around here,
From Hamilton, yeah.
From Hamilton, signed a 4-year deal worth $285 million, which roughly equates to like $71 million per season.
Yeah.
That's more than the San Jose Sharks spent on the cap this year.
Yeah.
So they just bought out Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Obviously, Logan Couture is no longer there. They have the room to spend when they need to.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the dangerous and maybe the fun part for Mike Grier is like, who do you complement all these young guys with?
Yeah, and they have one of those guys already in Tyler Toffoli. Now it's a matter of finding other players of that ilk, and I would say of that age, and maybe slightly younger. But you want to make sure that you make the most of that cap space while you have it. This is where you don't want to make errors.
Don't get a Patrick Marleau.
Yeah, you have to be ready for certain players when you're bringing them in, and I feel like, when Ottawa got Alex DeBrincat, it was like, oh, this is too early. Like, you guys are not ready for somebody. Like, Alex DeBrincat is like a finishing,
right?
And to a lesser extent, when he went to Detroit, it's like, no, you guys are not ready. But for San Jose, if you can bring some veterans in, you're at the point where it's like, if it's a short-term pact, you can overpay a couple of guys where it's like, we really need you here, so we'll give you a little bit extra. But yeah, term, very key. And then when you have to sign those big extensions for a Celebrini or a Will Smith, you're set. But also, when you're trying to finally make a playoff push, you can add guys at the deadline who have salary and say like, hey, you know what? You guys have been great. You're still in the hunt. We want to reward you with some new teammates that can help push you over the hump. Again, it's probably not going to be this year, but it could be next year. So having that cap space, making sure you sort of keep the spreadsheet as clean as possible so you have that flexibility, I think is really key.
Yeah, I don't think they're not playoff ready this year.
Nah.
Which is kind of scary that they're going to probably get another top 5 or top 10 pick.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, who knows, right? Like, what if they got Gavin McKenna?
Oh boy.
Right? He's a winger too. So then you'd be set down the middle with some combination of Celebrini, Smith, and Misa. Because Smith and Misa, you could put one of them on the wing.
Yeah.
Right? And you got McKenna on the wing. I mean, that would be a devastating attack. That'd be very fun to watch.
Yeah. But then you run into the same problem that Toronto and Edmonton have been running into is you have too many high impact players who are going to cost a lot
at the same time.
Yeah. So that it's almost like it's a luxury to have these players, but at the same time, you can't be paying, everyone, what's going to probably be, the baseline for these guys are probably going to be 10 million when they're all up. Yeah. Just because the cap keeps going up. Like 10 million now is basically like 6.5 million.
Yeah.
What it used to be. So,
and I would say, for everybody watching this, when it comes to the salaries that we see today, you almost have to subtract $1 million or so, particularly on the long-term deals where you might say like, oh, so-and-so is not an $8 million player. It's like, well, no, he's not under the current, salary cap currency. But in 2 years, that $8 million, like you say, is probably more like 6 or 6.5. So there's going to be a lot of adjusting the way we think about players and their salaries because of the cap going up in the next couple of years.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk about Edmonton. They re-signed Evan Bouchard. What do you think of that deal? Because what is he getting? 10.5 million times 4.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to.
For a guy who provides a lot of offense, but not a whole lot of defense.
Yeah, although you know what, like I think during the Stanley Cup final, looking at the advanced stats, I think he was actually like the defensive side wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. I think he's one of those players that suffers from like the big sort of like turnover, like the sort of brain melt.
Every time there's a turnover, it ends up in his net.
Exactly. And it's like, it doesn't happen that often, but it's just glaring when it does. Yeah. So, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing where like the analytics say he was better, but at the same time, it's like, well, it happened. So, like a goal against is a goal against. But for somebody like him that is so dynamic and you think about that power play and how it hums.
Oh yeah.
He's such a big part of that. Like, you can't have the whole thing work without the threat of the Bouch bomb.
Yeah.
Because you have McDavid, who's going to carry the puck and it's be so fast. You have Draisaitl in his office. You got Nugent Hopkins in his office as the sort of bumper in the half wall, and then Hyman obviously when he's healthy. But Bouchard on the point, it's like
respect that.
You have to respect that. You have to have a man on him.
Yeah.
So again, 10.5 now. It sounds really high, but it's actually going to be more like 9, and then it's actually going to be more like 8 in like 3 years. And I think it does put them in a bit of a tough spot because they obviously have McDavid and Draisaitl and Darnell Nurse, who's at 9.25. So it's a tough spot for them. But again, like, if you're the Oilers, I know we've been harping on the goaltending for a couple of years now, but even with the goaltenders they had, they went to the Stanley Cup final twice in a row. Yeah,
you know what? When we're talking about Bouchard, we're talking about the goaltending. For me, we got to talk about Mattias Ekholm. Mm-hmm. And I've liked that Ekholm for a lot of years, but him coming back from that injury, he just wasn't himself.
He probably wasn't 100%, right?
Yeah. So, pairing Bouchard, it's similar to any kind of team that's got a puck-moving defenseman. You've got to pair him with the right guy.
Yeah.
So you do need to find your meat and potatoes defensive defenseman who is not going to cross the red line. He's basically just like, I'm stationed here. You guys go up there, and I'm just going to hang back here with the goalie.
Yeah.
So, I think that's going to be the challenge. Do you think that we're going to go live to Vancouver Canucks site editor Adam Kimelman in 1 second here to talk about all the moves that Vancouver has made. But with Edmonton, like, we're talking about Florida going in as the favorites coming out of the East. Edmonton's been there 2 years in a row, and it seems like they don't get the same amount of love. Are you expecting them deep again this year with what they've constructed so far?
I can see it going one of two ways. I can see them making
Evander Kane, right?
Yeah, but that might be like addition by subtraction.
Really?
He was really bad in the Stanley Cup final.
He was good before that.
He was good before that, but the problem is, like, he's a guy that plays on the line. And when he's on the wrong side of the line, it costs you games. And you could tell, like Chris Knobloch didn't mention him by name, but I think this was midway through the series. He was like, we got to stop the high sticking penalties. And Kane was the one taking multiple high sticking penalties. And it's not that he was accidentally, reaching for guys. It was a lot of just like going in for hits and not seeing where his stick, like they were like careless penalties where it's like, that's preventable. It's like, you're not preventing a goal by hooking a guy down or tripping a guy. These were preventable penalties. And then, of course, when he loses his cool, you can get an instigator. You can get just one penalty, or what would have been a power play turns into a 4-on-4. And I think the Oilers were just like, you know what, like, enough. Like, we don't know what we're getting out of him, so let's not even worry about it. And they'll get Zach Hyman back. And Zach Hyman is that big body who hits a lot, can score a lot, but is a lot more disciplined. So, I think with the Oilers, they're going to have some tough decisions just in terms of cap space. But at the least in the short term, it should be a desirable place for either free agents or somebody that's like, waving their no trade clause at the deadline. But I will say either they make another long run or they get knocked out in the first round, because teams will say, we need to jump on them right away. Like the Kings should have beat them. And I don't think it's a surprise that the Kings have a new head coach now, right? If Los Angeles and Edmonton play again in the first round, which, let's face it, they probably will, because it just always happens. I could certainly see Los Angeles knocking them off this time, where they're like, okay, for real, we need to just step on the neck. Don't make any mistakes.
Okay. We've got Adam Kimelman. He's in Vancouver. We're going to go live to Adam.
There he is.
Hey guys, busy morning so far, it looks like, or we're waiting for it, I guess.
Right on. Well, Adam, thanks so much for joining us here. Let's start with Brock Besser. It felt like in the run-up to free agency, everybody was expecting Besser out the door and to be one of the big names on July 1st or maybe July 2nd. He stays in Vancouver. What are your initial thoughts on this extension?
Well, I mean, everybody here is a little bit shocked that Besser did resign, just because we know about what happened here in Vancouver, where they were, the Canucks were trying to trade him at the trade deadline. Obviously, they didn't get the package that they wanted, so they kept him. But we've heard this from Rutherford all along, that they were going to circle back on Besser, that they were going to try to keep him here. And, he's been here his entire career. He's been here for over a decade now. He obviously has chemistry with everybody. He is, really good friends with players like Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Garland, and Demko, who both also re-signed in Vancouver a year early. So, I mean, overall, this is a great deal when you look at how the cap is going to go up as well, especially because Besser is in that 30 goal range. It really is it's a big win for the organization, a big win for the fan base, who is very happy that Besser has re-signed.
Yeah, Adam, how much of these deals, whether it's the Garland, the Demko, and the Besser, I know, Vancouver wants to keep these guys around, but were they made to bring these guys back who are so close to Quinn Hughes? How important was that to make sure that Quinn Hughes is happy and, trying to do everything possible to make sure that this guy doesn't leave Vancouver for New Jersey one day?
Well, I mean, it's kind of been a running joke right now in Vancouver called Operation Keep Quinn Hughes, where that's why we've heard about, the Josh Norris trade potentially at the deadline, where Vancouver wanted to get Norris to come to Vancouver because, Hughes and Norris are very close. But in the end, you can bring in Hughes's friends, you can keep a lot of the players that he likes here, but if you don't have a contender, you don't have a team that makes the playoffs, it's not going to matter. So this is a good step. You're bringing in a guy who can get 30 goals, who can get, 70-ish points. You're getting a guy who has that chemistry. So if this is another move that helps keep Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, that just makes the deal look even better.
Adam, just before we had you on here, we were talking about the Oilers and Evander Kane. Evander Kane, now a member of the Vancouver Canucks. What has been the reaction in Vancouver and the greater British Columbia area about the hometown Evander Kane joining the Canucks? He is certainly a divisive player.
Well, I mean, just from an on-ice perspective, when this deal was made, because we didn't know that Besser was coming back, there's a lot of kind of questions on what type of deal this is, because, teams that are just trying to get into the playoffs probably aren't going after Evander Kane, especially when you're helping the Oilers clear all that cap space, essentially without any retention. So, I mean, Evander Kane now, when you look at the Canucks roster, because they have Besser, this is a guy who probably fits into the third, fourth line, and he's making over $5 million. So it's a bet. They're hoping that he can score 25 goals. They're hoping that he can be physical, and they're hoping that what happened in the Stanley Cup final, where he was taking a ton of penalties, doesn't happen. There's already talk that the Canucks are going to offer him an extension. So we'll see exactly what happens. But I mean, they're taking a bet on a guy who was injured all of last year. That's also a massive issue. This is a guy who's in his 30s now. So we'll see exactly how it plays out. The Canucks, now that they do have Besser, you have a little bit more flexibility with how you kind of produce your lines. Like Kane might fit into that second line role now because you have Besser and DeBrusk that you can kind of switch off. You have a guy like Höglander. So from a wings perspective, they're kind of set. Now it's all about the middle and who you can partner with, a guy like Kane to get the most out of him.
Hey, Adam, obviously last season was real disappointing for Vancouver. They finished 10th in the East, behind Calgary, which was, just a double whammy. But, we got a question here from Journalism John CU. Vancouver becomes a cup contender once again. Last season was a one-off. Agree or disagree?
Well, I mean, people will look at it and say, look, you're bringing back essentially the same roster minus Pius Suter plus Evander Kane. But this team really did make a push at the end of the season. And there are important parts that we are forgetting, or that people often forget. Thatcher Demko missed quite a lot of time last year. Pettersson had all the injuries. There was the, JT Miller situation. Dakota Joshua, that was a player who came back from cancer diagnosis, and still he was, as soon as he started picking up his game, he got injured again. So, I mean, you can talk about injuries, you can talk about all the off-ice stuff, but like, this team really pushed for a playoff spot, even though all of that stuff was going on. So, I mean, how much of it, losing Pius Suter is going to be massive, because he's one of the best penalty killing forwards in the league, and him and Teddy Bluger really found some chemistry there on the penalty kill. But you're making a lot of bets that, these players who had down years are going to bounce back in a big way. Like even Höglander had a, down year. He was really good analytically, but he just couldn't put the puck in the net. So, I mean, they're making safe bets based off of past history of these players. So we'll see if it's enough. And I mean, yeah, Demko and Pettersson are the big keys here. Like, are they going to bounce back to where they were, or are the injuries just kind of going to pile up over the next couple years?
All right. Well, Adam, you've got a busy day ahead of you. Thanks for checking in. For those listening, go to thn.com/Vancouver for all the news on the Canucks. Jared, do we have anything?
We have a flurry of signings, although given the Panthers have won the Stanley Cup, it's more of a blizzard. But let's start with LA. So we've got LA punching their ticket to the Stanley Cup Finals next year by signing, of course, Corey Perry. According to many people, this is a bonus-heavy contract that could earn him up to 3.5, but maybe the cap hit will be less. Joining him in LA will be Joel Armia. Then the Rangers have just announced Gavrikov, 7 times 7 for a total of $49 million. Some people think that's a lot. Some people think it's not enough. Then you have Connor Brown, 4 years in New Jersey. Term to come on that one. And last but not least, we have Dan Vladar, 2 years in Philadelphia at 3.35. And just to finish that up, it looks like the Oilers have, in the last couple hours, gotten rid of Corey Perry, Connor Brown, and Arvidsson as well on his way out. So
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess let's start with
Corey Perry or no?
Corey Perry. Yeah, I guess we already talked about Edmonton. Losing Connor Brown, that's a tough one. I didn't think he was very good in the Stanley Cup final this year. I think he was amazing in the Stanley Cup final before that, where his penalty killing in particular, and as a shorthanded threat, he was really good. But yeah, let's talk about LA, because we were just saying before with Edmonton, they always meet up with the Kings in the first round. So now Corey Perry could face his old Edmonton teammates in the first round. That would be quite the storyline.
That'd be 4 straight first round meetings.
I think it'd be 5.
No way.
I think it's 5 if they met again. Yeah. But so Corey Perry and then Joel Armia. See, I think I was trying to think after the Stanley Cup, like, okay, if it's not Edmonton in the West again, who would it be? And
what, Corey Perry?
No, just in general, as a
okay.
contender. And I was like, is it going to be Los Angeles? Because again, they should have won that series.
Mm-hmm.
They have a new coach. And even though Marco Sturm has never been an NHL head coach, he has a lot of great experience, especially internationally when he was Germany's Olympic coach. And he didn't have any high-end talent, but they came together. They were defensively sound. They lost to Russia in a heartbreaker, but they still medaled, which was incredible, even though there was no NHLers at that tournament. But if you apply that kind of structure to a team that obviously still has Andrei Kopitar, who is still in, near Selke form, I think it's fair to say. They still have Drew Doughty.
Still got Philip Deneau, who's kind of...
They still have Phil Deneau.
Near Selke.
Yeah, near Selke as well. Quentin Byfield's going to be a little bit better.
I'm still waiting for him to have that big breakout year. I thought we were going to get it this year, and only 23 goals, 54 points.
Which is okay, but I know what you're saying. You want 70, right?
I want him to lead the Kings in points.
Yeah.
Goals and points. Yeah, this year it was Kempe with 35 goals. But
Kempe is sneaky good, though. That's the thing that people forget. And this is funny. At the Four Nations, on media day, we're talking to Drew Doughty, and he's like, who you guys have to watch out for in this tournament that nobody talks about is Adrian Kempe. He's like, that guy is seriously good. Now, granted, they're teammates, so he's going to pump his tires. But Adrian Kempe was one of Sweden's best players in that tournament. So in Armia, you get another great defensive forward who can play further down your lineup, and now Corey Perry, where again, like, you don't need a lot from him, but come playoff time, he always seems to be that guy.
It's an old team, Ryan.
It is an old team. Although you got Byfield and Brant Clark.
Yeah, I know, but you got Doughty, who's old. You got Kopitar, who's old. You got Kemper, who's 35 years old.
Yeah. Goalies are different, though.
True, but, that's my one concern is you got too many old guys that you're still counting on for significant contributions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know Byfield's, he's only 23 years old,
so
he's really just scratching the surface. But, even David Riddick, right? Like, big game Dave, like, how old is he?
Big save Dave?
Big save Dave.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, if we're talking about Los Angeles here, is they sent away Jordan Spence.
He's going to be 33 next month.
Yeah. So Jordan Spence isn't there anymore. And I think that was kind of a matter of they knew they had Brant Clark coming up, and you can only have so many guys like that are offensively inclined, because you do have Drew Doughty still.
Like, I still think it's Vegas coming out of the West.
Like,
in terms of the favorite.
Yeah, my only concern with Vegas is now their defensive depth is really shallow because Petrangelo's gone, and then they just traded Nick Hague. Unless you feel Jeremy Lauzon is on the same level as Nick Hague, and I will accept that. But they still, they got Hannafin. Yeah, they got Shea Theodore.
That's Petrangelo for game one. Like, come on. We all expect him to be there in the playoffs, don't we?
Okay, here's the thing, though, and this might be a blog if I get bored. Do you think that Alex Pietrangelo would pass up his last chance at an Olympics to miss the entire season and come in for the playoffs? Do you think he would value winning another Stanley Cup over a first Olympic gold medal?
He passed on the Four Nations. I know it wasn't a big deal, but...
And nobody thought the Four Nations was going to be what it was beforehand. Let's keep that in mind. Everybody's like, what is this tournament?
Still,
and then it turned into
another
the
chance
biggest
to
tournament
skate
ever.
with, Crosby and McKinnon, and, Pietrangelo would have got to skate with McDavid. And,
right. But he did skip that, I think, knowing that he would have made the Olympic team anyways.
Had he not already won an Olympic gold, then I'm kind of with you, but...
Did he win Olympic gold?
I think 2010, was he not on that team? He was definitely there in 2014. Brian's checking it up, and if I'm right, I think I get another slice of pizza.
There you go. You get your choice.
But for me, yeah, Vegas is the favorites coming out of the West. Even with, what you're talking about on the defense, Marner and Eichel are just going to tear it up. Like, I think this might be the year where we're talking Eichel for maybe not MVP, although I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets in the final there for them.
Yeah.
But for me, he's not known as a guy that we'd probably pencil in as a Rocket Richard Trophy winner.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Marner gets him there?
I think that's possible. And you're right, Pietrangelo does have an Olympic gold medal, so good call on that.
With Sochi?
2014.
Sochi, yeah.
Yeah, 2014.
The most boring Olympics ever.
Right.
Babcock trying to win every game 1-0.
Yes. I could certainly see Eichel putting up like 110, 120 points, assuming everybody's healthy and everything's cool otherwise.
Yeah.
Mark Stone's health is always an X factor.
That's true.
In terms of forwards, I don't really worry about Vegas. It's just that defense where it's like you're asking a lot of Caden Korczak at this point.
True. But you know what? Another underrated, or maybe not underrated, but another factor or asset that you've got with Marner is, this guy is defensively sound. And
he kills penalties.
Yeah. So, I know he's not a defenseman, but he probably helps out your defense. And, Eichel, it's weird. He's never scored more than 36 goals. That year where he had 36 goals, 78 points, that was his best year from like a point per game, goal per game.
Yeah. He had 94 this year.
77. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So he's on the doorstep.
You don't think of him as a Rocket Richard Trophy guy. I think that changes this year. if I'm going to handicap it, I'd probably put him alongside, I don't even know if Austin Matthews, does he get a Rocket Richard now that he doesn't have a Marner?
Well, let's see.
Because Matthew Nice does not get him any assists.
No. But let's see how healthy Matthews is, right? That's a big question. And it has been the past couple of years.
It'll be interesting whether Nylander takes that spot next to Marner. Matthews. I keep saying Marner.
Right.
I'm going to get this guy to my...
That's right. It's so fresh. It's so fresh. You need time to digest.
Were you joking that when the schedule comes out that Vegas should play Toronto? Or someone was joking that on...
It wasn't me. Well, obviously they will play Toronto.
The first game.
The first game of the season.
Usually you don't see the East-West matchups. But
that's great. True. Yeah. Would they put it in Toronto, though?
No.
Or would it have to be in Vegas?
It would have to be Toronto if you're going to do that.
That's true.
I want to see that.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. I saw this that Marner will wear number 93 in Vegas.
His Knights,
his minor league days because Doug Gilmour.
That's his Knights jersey, right?
Yeah. Did you want to talk about the Rangers since they signed Vladislav Gavrikov?
Yeah, let's do that because obviously that's a team that incredibly underachieved. Hold on, we got Jared Ostroff with his finger up here, so it means something must be buzzing on X.
We got to add one thing to the New York Rangers conversation. Looks like a sign and trade will send K'Andre Miller from New York to Carolina. Still working on the details of the money, and we'll leave the Michael Pezzetta sweepstakes for later.
I was going to say, if you mention Michael Pezzetta, I'm going to throw you at the window.
So that was a sneaky ad by the Leafs, not as impressive as the K'Andre Miller extension.
Right. Okay, so this is a great time to talk about the Rangers.
Yeah.
Because it had been rumored for a while that they were going to move on K'Andre Miller, which I think is a terrible mistake.
Gavrikov
now you have Gavrikov, yeah. But K'Andre Miller is still a young guy. I think he still has so much potential. Carolina is such a good landing spot for him.
They love their defenseman.
And he is a guy that he's got the athleticism. He's he plays a two-way game. Probably hewing more to a shutdown guy, I would say. So I guess I understand if the Rangers, if they were falling out of favor with Miller, they set their sights on Gavrikov, 7 times 7, which again, the new math. $7 million, totally reasonable.
Only it's normally just $2 million then, basically.
Right. But Gavrikov, he's a shutdown guy. He's not going to get you much offense. If you're the Rangers, you have Adam Fox. So you're fine when it comes to power play.
Need more defensemen than just one?
You certainly did, which is why I'm still concerned about the Rangers because they're subtracting all these guys.
Yeah.
So, okay, they bring in Gavrikov. That's a nice, shutdown element. But you lost K'Andre Miller. So, minutes-wise, you're basically Gavrikov, he played a lot of minutes. He'll play a lot of minutes in New York. So, but you're still subtracting what Miller can give you. And again, Miller could probably play more next season than he did this season because he's still a young NHLer. Will Cooley, there was talk about an offer sheet for Will Cooley. And I just worry that the Rangers, Kreider's gone already. Trouba was gone last year. Capocacco was traded last year. Who is this team?
I don't know. Mike Sullivan, he's got his work cut out from them? Or has Shesterkin got his work cut out from him?
Both, I would say. Yeah, I think it helps that Sullivan's there. But at the same time, are we trying to say that coaching was the problem last year? No, but the guy that needed to be fired is the guy that does the firing. So
I still think, they obviously underachieved last year. JT Miller for a full season is going to help them.
Certainly.
But you're right. That defense is weak. You're almost expecting Shesterkin to stand on his head now.
Yeah, and they did not qualify Zach Jones. And you can say, okay, well, Zach Jones, maybe he's a tweener NHLer to begin with. But, he was a warm body, and he was a puck mover.
Yeah.
It seems like they bobbled his development. Seems like a lot of Rangers were upset with how they were treated last season. So there are some, wounds that need to be healed in New York. And, that's the big question is, can they get back to the playoffs? Right now with their defense, so Miller's gone. So you got Fox, Will Borgen, who did play well for them.
Yeah.
Carson Soucy, Braden Schneider, Urho Vakanainen. And that's it.
That's it.
That's who they got right now. Is that enough to come out of a division that's going to be ruled by Carolina? New Jersey will probably bounce back.
Yep.
Washington is probably going to be fine. Maybe not as good as they were this year.
So Washington is the wild card for me because, I thought they had a great offseason, as, they probably showed.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that the record, which everyone thought was going to be a distraction, ended up being something that they kind of all rallied behind.
True.
And it probably helped them overachieve.
Mm-hmm.
They're a team that I could easily see go from first to, like, they won the President's. No, they didn't win the President's.
They were close. I think they won the East.
Yeah, they won the East. I could see them falling out, or at least just being a wild card team.
I could certainly see them be more like a third or fourth team. And let's not forget, there was 5 teams in the Atlantic last year that made the playoffs, only 3 in the Metro.
Right.
I could see that happening again. Because, again, we were talking about this earlier. Detroit has a goalie now in John Gibson. Montreal adds Dobson to a roster that already made the playoffs,
right?
Albeit, with some luck. Ottawa was a solid playoff team and has not lost anybody significant yet. They re-signed Claude Giroux, as we mentioned it off the top. So who drops out to give the Rangers a spot?
Yeah, for me, it's, I expect Ottawa to be back there. I think, the Toronto, the 2 Florida teams, and Ottawa are pretty much close to locks for me. Then I would expect maybe a Detroit to be that other wildcard team. And you're right, that leaves only 3 teams from the Metro. So you expect Carolina to be there.
Yeah,
and
New Jersey.
Yeah, I guess New Jersey. They're
going
to have a healthy Jack Hughes.
And now they have Connor Brown.
And they got a Jake Allen.
And they have Jake Allen. They re-signed Jake Allen.
For like nothing.
Right. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Jake Allen, who could have been the biggest goalie on the market.
No goalies available, right?
No goalies available.
Just Jake Allen.
Just Jake Allen. And Jake Allen said, no, I'm good. I'm happy. What was it? 5 years?
5 years at like 1.5.
At 1.8? 5 times 1.8? Like, to me, that signals somebody who is happy where they are.
5 times 1.8, Ryan.
There you go. That signals to me a goaltender who is happy where he is, who likes his role, who has clearly settled down in the greater Newark Orange area. Likes to go into Manhattan every once in a while.
Does not like pumping his own gas.
Doesn't like pumping his own gas. He likes Bruce Springsteen. And he's saying, you know what? I would rather have stability than a couple million more on what would probably be a shorter term deal, I would assume. If he had gone on the open market, do you think anybody would give him 5 years if they had to pay, say, 3 or 4 million?
So the difficult thing with Jake Allen is if I'm a team that's acquiring him, I'm either looking for a number 2 who's dependable, who can come in and spot duty, or I've got a young guy that I know could benefit from having Jake Allen around. And he played that role with Jordan Binnington. He did that in Montreal with Montembeault. And he's just, it sounds like he's just a good guy to have in the room, and he's not going to cause waves with the other goalie. So having him in New Jersey doesn't, you don't necessarily need him. But I'm trying to think, which teams would you look to add him to? Because, I know he's the only goalie available, but like, which teams would have benefited from there? Like Edmonton, we keep saying needs an upgrade in that. He wasn't going to be an upgrade over Stuart Skinner or Cal Pickard.
That was my thinking too. It's like, he's a very good backup goaltender. If you're Edmonton, you have a very good backup goaltender in Calvin Pickard. Your problem is like Stuart Skinner is either like Vezina caliber or like AHL caliber. And, there was like nothing in between for much of the playoffs. So you're kind of in a spot where, and you know what, like Stan Bowman said it, I think right after the Stanley Cup, he's like, look, like Stuart Skinner, or at least our goaltending, including Stuart Skinner, were the better goaltenders in most of our series other than the final.
Right.
So, I mean, whether you buy that or not, that's what that was what the Oilers were projecting. They were saying either we don't think we can get another goaltender, or we think that our goaltending is good enough that we can paper it over with the dazzling heroism of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and company.
Right. No, I agree. And that's why maybe Jake Allen just surveyed it and said, you know what, I'm happy here. I think that the Devils could be one of those teams that we're talking about come playoff time as, you know, a cup contender. Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to be there? And you mentioned maybe he's got a young family that just is happy with where they are. And to get 5 years, you know, if you're talking about big money for Jake Allen, it's probably going to be a 2-year deal.
Right.
So he basically got the same amount of money. He gets to stretch it out and be an NHLer for the next 5 years.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing is like, I mean, Jake Allen, it's fun. He's 34. It's like, this always makes me feel old because I was at the draft that he was drafted at.
Right.
And I remember thinking like, ooh, no, it was either nobody in the Quebec League or no goaltenders went in the first round. It might have been both. And then it was like, oh, Jake Allen went in the second round. It's like, that was the first one. So he's 34. A 5-year deal takes him to 39. Maybe that's it for him.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe he's happy with a pretty nice career where, you know, he had some success and, you know, he has given himself the stability. And you're right. Like New Jersey, again, let's look at that division. Washington. Some of the shooting percentages were like totally out of whack this year, right? Ovechkin, Tom Wilson, I think Protas as well were all at like 20% at one time. So you figure Washington.
I want to say even Dylan Strome,
maybe Dylan Strome as well. So they might come back down to earth. Carolina is going to be very good, and we were talking about this at the Stanley Cup final, me and some other reporters. Carolina and Winnipeg are very similar, where they both have very specific structures that they play in. And therefore, they typically get off to good starts, assuming they're healthy, because they know exactly how they're going to play every single game. Whereas other teams might be finding their game. They might, you know, get sort of streaky. But when you get to the playoffs, if you solve their system, they don't have a plan B. So that's why Carolina and Winnipeg are two teams that I think we can fairly say have underachieved in the playoffs in these current eras, like the Brind'Amour era. And then, you know, I mean, you can't call it the Scott Arniel era because he's only been there a year, but the sort of, you know, like Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Connor Hellebuyck Jets. Right. They've underachieved in the playoffs, especially when they won the President's Trophy.
Yeah.
And they lost in the second round.
I think anytime you're picked to be a Stanley Cup winner and you're not getting past the conference final year after year, you're probably underachieving.
Right. So if you're New Jersey now, you look at Carolina and yeah, they're still going to be very good, right? And maybe Carolina wins the division. I don't think we'd be surprised by that at all.
No.
But if you're New Jersey, you say, okay, when we're healthy, the high-end elements we have, like a Jack Hughes, if Jacob Markstrom can be that goaltender, that gives us a chance. And now you add a guy like Connor Brown, who, again, this year I thought he was just all right. But the year before, in the Stanley Cup final in particular, he was a difference maker. And it was because of what he can do shorthanded, what he can do in the bottom six, how easy he fits.
He's a coach's dream, too. You can throw him anywhere. Like he's just so, like, hockey IQ is just off the charts.
Yes.
Like, he's not, like, when I always say, like, who's the smartest player in the NHL, I always look at a guy who's got limited skill sets and has managed to make an NHLer out of himself.
That's a fair point. And, yeah, I mean, Connor Brown, you know, you add him to a lineup where, you know, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Nico Hischier, you know, I've always been a big Dawson Mercer fan, who is more of a middle six guy, but very good in that respect. Like, they've got a good, solid top six. And then you look at the defense core, Brett Pesce, you know, Dougie Hamilton, who's kind of the ultimate X factor, just in terms of health and, like, what he can contribute. But Luke Hughes already establishing himself as a pretty hot young defenseman. Simon Nemec, still time to grow and develop. Like, he could take another step this year. Yeah. So, you know, they get Connor Brown. New Jersey is one of those teams where they've already done most of their building, right? Like, this is the finishing touch time, in my mind, for a team like New Jersey. And I think they, you know, GM Tom Fitzgerald probably looks at his division and says, like, we could, like, even if we don't win the division, we could come out of the division in the playoffs.
Yeah. Well, you figure, like, they were a playoff team last year.
Yeah.
And who were they missing come playoff time? like some significant pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, get them healthy. I imagine just another year of development for a lot of the young defensemen. Seamus, don't call me Seamus Casey as well.
There you go.
He should be, he'll probably get more games, I imagine, this year because he did split time with Utica in the AHL. They're an interesting team. Actually, probably a sneaky team because of just how, I still think they're too small. We kept talking about I still think their forwards are too small to make that deep run in the playoffs. That's where I'm almost like, Connor Brown didn't get them there in terms of the size.
True.
You would have liked them to kind of get someone that can, push some guys around.
Mm-hmm.
But that'd be my only kind of quibble with them because if they ever had to play the Florida Panthers,
they'd probably get smoked.
Probably.
Yeah.
There's going to be injuries.
There will be. I guess your only sort of hope is that your speed and the fact that you have so many mobile defensemen, maybe you can give Florida a run where, and again, by the time you meet the Panthers, it's the conference final. Who knows how banged up they will be? Who knows how tired they will be? If the Devils were to play like the Leafs played against Florida when they were at their best, not their worst,
right?
Then you probably say to yourself, like, okay, well, we probably have a chance here. So who knows? While we're talking about, we touched about on the Rangers, but what do you see? Like, what do they need at this point? Like, so Miller's gone. They get Gavrikov. Do we believe New York is a playoff team right now, or do they need to make another big splash?
I still think they're a playoff team. I thought they would have been a playoff team last year, and I was really high on New York. I just think they have so much talent. I think when you've got arguably one of the better goaltenders in the NHL, it's hard to miss the playoffs. That's why I thought last year was just kind of one of those anomalies that we're not going to see again. I don't know who else they're going to go after. That's the question. Like, there's not a whole lot of guys left, Ryan, that are going to make differences.
Would Ehlers be a target?
Yeah, I don't know if they need another forward, to be honest. And he's probably going to cost you more money than he's actually worth.
Fair.
It'd be interesting. We are going to be joined by Emma Lingan in a bit, and she's the Nashville Predators site editor. And last year you would argue that Nashville won free agency.
Right.
Like, they added Marchessault, they added Stamkos, they added Brady Shea, probably leaving some names off the board there. But it was like, oh my God, like Nashville is my Stanley Cup favorite right now. So it's not always,
doesn't always work out.
And what was it last year? Okay, 5 of the 6 teams that spent the most on July 1 last year did not make the postseason.
Wow.
So the Predators spent 122, nearly 123 million. The Kraken spent almost 95 million. The Bruins spent over 87 million.
Wow.
The Blackhawks spent 60 million. And the Canucks spent 51 million.
What did the Kraken spend $94 million on?
I don't know.
Montour. Okay.
Interesting.
I don't know. That doesn't seem to be, there must have been a lot of just like long to midterm pacts.
Yes.
That they needed to sign in Seattle.
So
it did not show up on the ice. I will tell you that.
So honestly, I know it's a holiday in Canada. Treating it as such and taking the day off might not be a bad decision for some of these GMs.
That's the thing, right? Is like, I mean, July 1st is super fun for us because, it's like if we make a mistake and say like, oh yeah, that was a great signing and it turns to be terrible, it's like there are no consequences.
Well, people let you hear about it, right?
They do, yeah, but you can mute them. But if you're a GM, like this is really the time where good GMs make their bones, where it's like, how do you avoid the landmines of free agency where it's so tantalizing to say we can get player X as long as we outbid everyone else. And then I guess Nashville is the great example. Although even in retrospect, you look at the players they got and it's like, those are all really solid players.
Yeah.
It just didn't come together.
Yeah,
and then it snowballed.
I expect it to be a different season for Nashville. That being said, it's never a bad idea to go bargain bin hunting in August.
True.
Listen up, hockey players. Why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro-level composite sticks at sticks.com? That's STIX.com. These all-black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. Best part? Prices start just at $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up sticks.com. That's STIX.com. Now and gear up without the markup. Let's go. Like I said, we're going to be joined by Emma Lingan very shortly. That Central Division, has it been a little quiet in your mind? Like nothing really from Minnesota, St. Louis, Winnipeg.
Yeah, well, St. Louis did have the Logan Mailloux, Zach Bolduc trade.
That's right. We didn't even mention that.
We have not talked about that yet.
What'd you make of that? Because obviously Montreal gets they are flush with defensemen. So
they it's a great deal for Montreal because Zach Bolduc, it took him a while to figure out the pro game. And I think this past season with St. Louis, he figured it out. I think he had 36 points in 72 games, which is like, it's not like blockbuster, but it's pretty good for a youngster who's like still learning to be consistent. He's a good two-way guy. And for Montreal, like you said, they had a glut of young defensemen.
Yeah.
Logan Mailloux obviously comes with a lot of baggage. But
comes with a lot of upside too. And that's sort of been the Blues' MO. Like last year, they get Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway.
Yep.
They've been getting guys that might benefit from a change of scenery or they see as untapped potential there.
Right. And again, like Logan Mailloux's still a young guy, only drafted in 2021. Defensemen typically take a little bit longer. He's a big kid, which again, like bigger players, we always say this with big centers, but it can apply to defensemen too. Like it takes them a little bit of time to figure out the NHL where it's like you're not going to be the strongest player on the ice anymore.
Yeah, especially with offensive defensemen too. Learning that defensive side, is always tough. And this is a guy, Mailloux, who is not Evan Bouchard, but did come out of London and did put up a lot of points as a defenseman.
Yeah. So I mean, for the St. Louis Blues, they've been so interesting because they never really rebuilt.
No.
They kind of retool. That's sort of been sort of a joke now. It's like, we're not rebuilding, we're retooling. But it's like, no, St. Louis actually did do that, where it's like they held on to some of their veterans. So they have that great connective tissue with a guy like Braden Shen, for example. And then you're now at the point where this is like a Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou led offense. And then, on defense, we've seen them lose guys over the years, like Pietrangelo, for example. So now it's more of a Colton Parayko blue line.
Yeah.
Right? So you add Mailloux to the sort of pile, and does he start the year in St. Louis? I don't know. I mean, they got Parayko, Justin Falk, Broberg, Nick Leddy, Cam Fowler, who was hilariously good in the playoffs, Tyler Tucker, who's more of a big shutdown guy. So, I mean, that's 6 guys right there. So I don't think it's a guarantee that Mailloux makes the top 6 right away, but he can be in that mix. He could get a job.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, outside of the fishbowl that is Montreal, does he make some positive contributions?
Awesome. We're going to Jared Ostroff. Jared, you got some breaking news over there?
I wouldn't call it breaking news, but it is kind of breaking Twitter at the moment. So I know we have Emma coming on to discuss things from the Nashville Predators perspective. So we have former Nashville Predator Tanner Jeannot, 5 years, $3.4 million in Boston, who will join Victor Arvidsson, kind of using up the money that I guess would have gone to Brad Marchand, will instead go to Tanner Jeannot, who I believe had 13 points last year.
Right. Tanner Jeannot must be one of the most fascinating players in recent history because he had an amazing rookie season in Nashville where it's like, oh, he's getting all these goals, he fights, like this is everything you want. And then he goes to Tampa
for a lot.
Did not work whatsoever. Now he's getting a shot in Boston. The Bruins, to me, I'm very fascinated to see what they look like this year. Because if you think about the guys that they moved off of, they still have Charlie McAvoy.
Who's your centers?
That's the thing. They have no centers. Elias Lindholm would be like their best center.
Yeah.
Right? Like James Hagen's should have another year at Boston College just to get stronger. But if James Higgins was their number one center like the year after this next season, I would not be shocked.
Yeah.
Right? Because you need somebody to play with David Pastrnak at his level. James Higgins has those smarts, you know, and he's got the wheels that he can keep up with Pastrnak. I just don't know if you want to throw a teenager that is basically my size into the NHL right away. I think, you know, one more year in Boston College would be amazing for Higgins. But yeah, what does that mean for the Bruins, where it's like Zacha and Lindholm are basically your top two centers, and you don't have a lot of weapons. They might not be easy to play against. You add Jeannot, they got, you know, Geeky, who's a big body, but they don't have Trent Frederick anymore. He was traded at the deadline to Edmonton, so it really feels like it's going to be a transition year for Boston.
You know what I was saying, I remember, you know, throughout the year, especially at the end, that I wouldn't be surprised if Boston was back in the playoffs. It was just kind of like a 1 year blip. They got their high pick. Mm-hmm. And then at the time I thought, yeah, maybe they'll even re-sign Marchand to come back. Now I'm thinking, I don't think they're a playoff team this year. I don't see it happening.
I don't see it. I mean, they're not better than Ottawa on paper. I don't think they're better than Montreal on paper at this point.
No.
Detroit? Maybe not.
Yeah, it's weird because, you know, it's hard to be in the playoffs with a quote unquote number one center.
It's true. Even when you have somebody like Pastrnak, who is an elite, you know, top 10 player in the NHL, top 15 at worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need guys to play with them. They got McAvoy, they got Swayman in net, but they don't have a lot else.
No, usually if you got the number one goalie and a number one defenseman, and then you've got a difference maker, those are the makings of a really good core. But you're right that, you know, if there was a team that needed to go out and make a big splash in free agency, it was the Bruins. But, you know, I don't know who they were going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, wow, Chandler Stevenson. Send him to us. Okay, so are we getting close to bringing on Emma Lingan here from Nashville? She is coming on soon. I don't see Nashville making the same sort of splash that they did a year ago. That being said, they probably don't need to.
Yeah. I will say one more thing on Boston. In adding guys like Arvidsson and Jeannot, you are kind of fortifying yourself for the future, where if you say to yourself, like, okay, this is a bit of a blip, but it might be a 2-year blip, then, you know, if Higgins comes in either this season or next season, then that helps out in terms of elite young talent. If you get another high pick in 2026, like, I mean, they're probably not going to get Gavin McKenna, but who knows?
Oh boy.
Right? Like, they could win if they miss the playoffs, they could win the lottery. Even if they don't win the lottery, there's going to be a high-end player in the top 5 that potentially could join them very soon. And then you're kind of backing into it in a weird way, where it's like you're getting your veteran talent before you're getting your elite young talent. But again, they still have Pastrnak and they still have McAvoy in their primes. So if you add a couple of pieces there, and you can always make other moves, you know, in the next sort of year and a half.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's another down year in Boston where they kind of say, you know what, like, let's just go out, let the chips fall where they may. And, you know, if we miss the playoffs, hey, it's going to happen. Maybe they even trade a couple of guys at the deadline and get some more assets.
I remember, though, Boston missing the playoffs 2 years in a row. That just doesn't happen.
It doesn't, but that might be the reality in the NHL today, where there's so much parity. And if you think about the Bruins, like, they don't have a lot in their pipeline. They certainly, you know, Higgins was an amazing ad for them. Mm-hmm. So
I got one person commenting here, Eichel to Boston next year. Eichel will be a free agent, or, you know, his contract ends at the end of next year, I should say.
Right.
We don't know if he's going to be a free agent. You know, Vegas doesn't have a whole lot of loyalty to their guys, so who knows? Maybe they'll just find the next Eichel.
Right.
But we are getting ready to join up with Emma Lingan in Nashville. Emma, can you hear us there?
I can.
All right, Emma, it's not as busy of a year for the Predators this summer. Maybe that's a good thing. How are you characterizing this July 1?
Yeah, can't possibly be any busier than last July 1 for the Predators. I think that for the most part, the fan base here in Nashville was mostly hoping for a pretty slow day so far. Not a whole lot that Nashville can do. They're kind of, they have some cap space, but they really, the biggest kind of move I think people are waiting for is to see what kind of contract they re-sign Luke Evangelista to. Other than that, though, it doesn't look like they're going to be too busy. I think that, again, after Barry Trotz making really big moves, taking some really big swings here over the last year, I think the fan base is ready for him to take a break from that for right now and maybe just kind of let the dust settle and kind of see what happens here this year.
Fair enough. So, Emma, we did get some Nashville news the other day. A trade brings Nick Hague in from Vegas. Jeremy Lauzon goes the other way. Can you just sort of break down that trade for us and maybe what it brings to the Predators? Like, what was the kind of impetus for this deal in your mind?
Well, when it comes to the Predators' needs on the back end, I will say that Hague definitely fulfills the inches over 6 feet metric that they were definitely looking for. A little bit surprising, to be honest, by the terms of the trade, just because, less surprised about Hague. Yes, they wanted some size on defense. They needed that. But in terms of what they sent back, Jeremy Lauzon, I mean, to me, that's almost a 1-for-1 move of, Lauzon and Hague. Very similar players, big, physical, kind of throw the body around. But then you also add in Colton Sissons, who this is a team in Nashville that already lacked center depth in a big way. And Sissons, while maybe didn't have the highest ceiling of all the centers they had on that roster, he definitely had the highest floor, I think. And he was a guy that you could play throughout the lineup. Like, is he really a 1C? No, but he could be if you needed him to. Really could go anywhere. And so that was a little puzzling to me for a team, like I said, that is lacking in center depth. And this is still a team that's trying to win right now with the roster that they have. I know it sounds may sound a little far-fetched after the year that they had last year, but I mean, by all accounts, we have to believe that was an outlier, I think, just because if you look at the roster, the amount of talent, the amount of scoring on that roster, especially, I mean, once you figure out the defense, I think that you have every reason to believe that this year is going to be better for the Nashville Predators. Can't get much worse, but I think that it's going to be, it's just interesting. I'm hesitant to, make sweeping judgments on free agency moves until, the totality of the moves have been completed. So when it comes to free agency and trades and things like that. So the Hague deal, I think it's good. It gets them a big defenseman, big young defenseman who's, theoretically in his prime, which is a good thing. Nashville needs that. But I think now they need to figure out, first of all, the right side of their defense, because right now their entire defensive core consists of 7 left shot defensemen, Justin Barron, and Nick Blankenberg, and that's it. So they really need to figure out the right side of the defense. And I think there's, obviously the free agency market's pretty thin in that regard as well. So especially, you had Ekblad signing, you had Fabro re-sign, all these right shot D-men are kind of coming off the board here. So it's a little bit of a waiting game here. I think maybe fans are getting a little restless about what Barry Trotz might be doing with the right side of the defense.
Yeah, obviously fit's going to be important for that Nashville defense. And I wonder if that was part of the reason why the Predators didn't look like, didn't play well last year, is they just had so many new bodies in the lineup where, it took a while for them to all fit into place and figure out where they needed to play with one another. Is that why maybe you're kind of optimistic about this coming season and that, it can't get any worse for Nashville?
Yeah, I think, when you look at, I think a lot of fans are upset with Barry Trotz after how last year went, but I think if you look at the moves that he made at last year's free agency, he took a direction. He took this team in a direction, which is something that it had been lacking for so long. Under David Poile, it looked like this team was sort of like in that middle area where it's like, okay, we're going to make the playoffs, but we're probably not going to make it past the first round, but that's okay. We'll just keep making the playoffs. And I think fans were getting tired of that. So Barry Trotz, for better or for worse, he picked a direction. They were at a crossroads. They could have gone the rebuild direction, and they could have gone the win now direction. And I think signing UC Saros to the contract extension is what set this whole thing in motion, that signaled, okay, we are trying to win right now. But he also didn't really leverage any of the team's future when he did that. He didn't give up he didn't give up any draft picks or blue chip prospects or anything like that. So, I mean, Yaroslav Askarov is sort of the outlier there, but again, I just don't think his timeline really fit with where they were with Saros. I think they've made up for that now in getting Justus Annunen, and then they just drafted a goalie, so I think that they're set up there for a while. But yeah, I think that looking at the roster in Nashville, Barry Trotz said, he identified what's the biggest thing we need? Scoring. Okay, well, no one is looking at this Nashville roster with Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault and Philip Forsberg and saying, well, where's the scoring going to come from? Like he addressed that in theory. He addressed it on paper. He got the scoring, and it ended up being the defense that was the issue. So I think now you need to be able to, it's just the working as a 5-man unit, because if the defense isn't strong, the forwards, they don't have lanes, they can't score. It was kind of a mess. And like you said, there's so many different bodies out there, whether it was injury or trades or what have you. So I'm hoping, for their sake, they can get a little bit more stability in that regard and maybe hopefully, like I said, do a little bit better this year.
Emma, I just had a question about the overall sort of, I guess, philosophy in Nashville right now. And, you talked about the direction Trotz is taking them in. But we did see a couple of young guys, Zach Leroux, Fedor Svechnikov, get some time this year. They just drafted Brady Martin 5th overall, who by all intents, could be a scoring center, one that they've really never had in their history. And maybe he's only a number 2, like a Sam Bennett type, but I think anybody would take that in the playoffs these days. But is there still going to be room for some young guys? Like obviously Brady Martin probably goes back to junior, but like Leroux and Svechnikov, do we see roles for them still, or do you see Nashville being a bit more active, either today, this week, whatever it will be, in terms of the depth chart?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule out Nashville being active in maybe some smaller moves. I wouldn't expect any big moves. Not that there are a ton of big moves to even be made anymore in terms of free agency, I think. But yeah, I would. When it comes to, I'll start with the center depth with Svechnikov. I mean, Svechnikov is your 2C. They have essentially determined that. Ryan O'Reilly is on that top line. They essentially chose Svechnikov as their 2C last year when they traded Tommy Novak to Pittsburgh. That was kind of their way of saying, okay, this is our guy. He showed, I would say, market improvement from his debut to the end of the year last year. He then, I think that he's just been, you've seen the exact kind of progression from him that you want to see from a young player. And so I think that he will absolutely have a role. I thought maybe maybe 3C until Sissons got traded. So now he might very well be the 2C. So I think that's a role that they're expecting him to grow into. Again, like you said, once Brady Martin is, ready to play at the NHL level, that's maybe when you see Svechkov go down to a 3C, just kind of depending on what the development trajectory is there. Zach Leroux was kind of relegated, I would say, to a fourth line role most of last year, which I personally would like to see him get maybe some more top 6 minutes this year. I think that he's a guy who, at least in the AHL, especially, was a goal scorer. I mean, he could put the puck on the net, but he also has that side of his game that is a bit of an acquired taste, I think, for a lot of opposing fans. He's scrappy. He's got that sandpaper element, as Andrew Brunette likes to call it. So, I fear that maybe they turn him into a fourth line grinder, a little bit too much. I don't want him to lose that scoring touch. But I think now, if you look at the roster the way it is, I mean, there's certainly no one standing in his way as far as, potentially moving up into a top 6 role. So I think that we definitely see those guys this year.
All right, Emma, appreciate you coming on. As everyone knows, Emma is the host of the Wraparound, as well as, she's former site editor for the Nashville Predators, still based in Nashville. So thanks so much. And for those who are interested in following along with the Nashville Predators, please go to thn.com/Nashville. Enjoy the rest of the day, Emma. Let's see if the Nashville Predators, pull off some big moves. Probably not, but we shall do.
Probably not, but hopefully not. Thanks, guys.
So, Ryan, we've got some we got some new GMs in the league. Matthew Darche with the New York Islanders. We've got Ken Holland with the LA Kings, and we've got Jason Botterill with Seattle Kraken. We'll see how the rest of the offseason goes, but any first impressions on how Matthew Darche's, offseason has gone? Obviously, the Islanders had the number 1 overall pick, and they made some good trades and some interesting picks as well at the draft.
Yeah, I liked what Matthew Darche has done so far. I think he's trying to put his stamp on this organization and steer it into a different direction. The Noah Dobson trade obviously was massive. I know he had a down year this past season, but he's an excellent defenseman. It's going to be very hard to replace him right away.
Yeah.
Right? Matthew Schaefer could be that guy pretty soon, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Islanders take a step or two back this season. And I think that's fine, because it's funny, Emma was talking about Nashville being in that mushy middle for so long. That's what the Islanders have been for so long now. And you kind of have to pick a lane. So with this draft, they get Matthew Schaefer first overall. That was obviously the correct pick. He's a tremendous young talent. He'll anchor that blue line for a decade, maybe longer. But then with the picks that they got from Noah Dobson, they got Victor Eklund, who for me, could have been a top 10 pick. Yeah. I understand, because he's sub 6 foot, they always get dinged on draft day, right? Even though Victor Eklund has a tremendous motor, has already played against men, has already helped Djurgården get promoted to the SHL in a massive series between the big Stockholm teams, the Djurgården and AIK, is basically like if the Mets and Yankees were both in AAA for some reason, and only one of them could get back to the majors. They even call it the Subway Series, right? Because they play at the same rink, so both fans can just take the subway to the game. It was like the biggest series in Swedish history. Eklund was part of that. So was Anton Frondell, that went 3rd overall to Chicago. But Eklund was amazing at the World Juniors. He can score. He doesn't mind playing physical, even though he's a smaller guy. And not even that small, right? He's 5'11", probably 170 pounds. And then they get Keishon Aitchison, who is just really hard to play against. A defenseman who plays very physical, is not afraid to fight, but also broke out offensively this season with the Barrie Colts in the OHL. So they get 3, to me, awesome picks in the first round. So they are now setting the table for the future. I wouldn't mind seeing the Islanders kind of step back a bit this year and I mean, in terms of free agency, trades, things like that, you fill out your roster, but it's hard to see them making a splash in terms of additions.
Mm-hmm.
But what you could see is, next summer, when you've got some guys coming up at you as UFAs, do they stick with those players, or do they kind of strip things down like at this trade deadline and say, okay, like we know we've got guys coming, but we need a rebuild, because they really haven't rebuilt in a very long time. I don't know if they've ever seriously rebuilt.
Yeah, I just want the Islanders to be an exciting team. It just seems like, maybe it's because Lou Lamoriello was just there, but they're not a fun team to watch.
Right.
And they're in the New York market where they're obviously going to be overshadowed by the Rangers, but now that they are picking up a lot of young guys, they still got Matt Barzal there, so he's a fun player to watch. I just want to see him be able to do kind of exciting things.
For sure.
Win or lose, just be a team that I want to watch. How about Botterill? Like, obviously he was an AGM with the Kraken. Now he gets the team to himself. That Kraken team, it's been a couple, I guess a couple years ago, or was it 3 years ago, where they upset the Colorado Avalanche, who had just come off winning the Stanley Cup. Kraken upset them in the first round, but they haven't really been able to kind of build upon that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you're looking for them to do this offseason?
Yeah, and again, I think this is a team where, they got Mason Marchment. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Mason Marchment, who's I think older than most people probably think. He's 30.
Is he really?
Yeah, because he was a late bloomer,
yeah.
Right? Worked his way up from the ECHL, if I'm not mistaken. To me, the Kraken mistakes came a couple of years ago where they kept signing veteran guys that were like good but not great.
Right.
So you have a team now that they have a couple of high-end guys like a Matty Beniers. They just signed Ryan Lindgren. So again, a player
4 years at $4.5 million annually.
Yeah. So that, again, it's fine. Whatever. Ryan Lindgren, defensive guy.
Yeah.
He's had his ups and downs recently, certainly. But I would say, like, offensively, very much like the Islanders, they're not dynamic enough. Like,
no.
Who do you want to see on Seattle?
I want to see the Kraken.
You want to see the mascot? Yeah. Like, there's nobody that you would pay to see, really. Like Matty Beniers is a great young player, but he's a two-way guy. Shane Wright, two-way guy.
Yeah.
A lot of the veterans they have are, like Jaden Schwartz, Jared McCann, Jordan Eberle, like solid guys, but they're not like all-star caliber anymore. If they ever were, probably the most dynamic player is Vince Dunn, their defenseman. So I need clarity in Seattle, like with this roster, it's like maybe you make the playoffs, maybe you don't. Like you're kind of in that like Minnesota Wild spot.
Right.
And I feel like there needs to be more urgency because it is a new hockey market. And you did have a bit of a honeymoon where first year, doesn't matter what happens. You do, and then you do make the playoffs, you get an upset, so that's nice. But then how do you follow it all up? So you have to either get better or get worse for a couple of years and just hope that the fan base understands, like, this is how it goes.
Well, you want them to be like Vegas. And every team should try to be like Vegas.
Right.
Every year, they're out for one thing, which is to win a championship.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you've, been with Vegas since the very beginning and you're one of those, misfits, or, if you're Marc-Andre Fleury, a popular fan favorite, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If they think that there's someone available who's better, they're going to go after them. And they always go big game hunting. So, the moves that you see Vegas make, if you're a Seattle fan, you're going, oh, that's how an expansion franchise should be run.
Do that.
Yeah, do that every single year.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, who did Seattle get in this year? Oh, so they got Jake O'Brien. So they do have like what's shaping up to be a 1-2-3 punch down the middle.
Yeah. And Jake O'Brien, ultimately, like Shane Wright might be your shutdown guy. Like Jake O'Brien could probably, if it all works out, he might end up being your number one center, where he's incredibly smart, very elusive. He's got good size to him, excellent playmaker.
A guy from Brantford here too.
And he's right from Brantford.
Well, not from Brantford,
but plays for
the Bulldogs.
Here. Yeah. From Toronto.
I don't really know how far away the rink is from where we're recording today, and we are recording from Rooston Sports
headquarters.
Rooston Sports headquarters.
That's right.
So Ryan, let's it is Canada Day here, obviously all day. Let's look at the Canadian teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to handicap, who's got the best chance at winning a cup next year, and obviously, the Edmonton Oilers have gone to back-to-back finals. The best team in the NHL in the regular season were the Winnipeg Jets. Toronto Maple Leafs won their division, but obviously lost Mitch Marner. Then you've got Montreal, Ottawa, not far behind. Vancouver, which managed to, re-sign a lot of their players, and then Calgary, which overachieved, nearly made the playoff spot. How do you rank them? Like, who's got the best chance this year?
I think it's still Edmonton.
Still Edmonton?
Yeah. Toronto's interesting, right? Like, this might be a sort of reshuffling with Marner going out, and again, who knows if they'll add somebody else to the top six.
Mm-hmm.
But this might be one of those instances where the new mix ends up being better, right? If it's more balanced,
right.
If they use that cap space in positive ways. Let's not forget the Florida Panthers, the Huberdeau-Tkachuk trade.
Yeah. How
that completely changed their culture. I'm not saying this is exactly the same because Nick Waugh is not Matthew Tkachuk.
No.
But in terms of how they stack up in the playoffs against teams, again, like that was the big storyline, is that when it comes to games 5, 6, 7, like Mitch Marner has a difficult time scoring in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't have a Stolarz, like I mentioned earlier.
Right.
Like, that was when the series sort of turned around for the Panthers. Nothing against Joseph Woll. I think that was the best tandem in the regular season, but there was a difference between having Stolarz there, who was a guy who could play the puck and get it to the D, versus Woll, who doesn't like doing that, and now became a little bit harder for Toronto to get out of their zone.
And of course, Florida, that's their expertise, right? Is like punishing teams on the forecheck.
Yeah.
So if you can break that, then you can have some success. But if they get in there, it's really hard to get them out.
How about Winnipeg? If they lose Nikolai Ehlers, and there's no word of whether he'll re-sign or if he's completely shut the door on the Jets, but that's still a Jets team that's got Hellebuck, that's got Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Josh Morrissey. That's a very good Jets team, and like I said, they win the President's Trophy last year. Is it just a matter of they're playing the Central Division where you've got to get past not only Colorado but then Dallas, and then and then you get to play in Edmonton?
Yeah, and it's a tricky spot. I mean, if you look so far in free agency, and granted, it's only been a couple of hours, but with everything that happened before free agency as well, like Dallas is not as good as they were, right? They've already lost Mason Marchment. We don't know what's going to happen with Jason Robertson. So other than the fact that Heiskanen is going to be healthy, they're probably not as good. Colorado, already traded away Charlie Coyle, who was one of their deadline pickups. So they're not going to be necessarily as strong as they were in the playoffs. Although anytime you have McKinnon and Makar, you give yourself a chance to win a Stanley Cup.
Right.
Minnesota's maybe creeping up there a little bit. I think Winnipeg is still one of the best teams, if not the best team in the Central for the regular season. Connor Hellebuck, I'm sure he's going to spend this summer thinking about what he can do differently in the playoffs, particularly on the road. Right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a matter of the Jets needing to play differently on the road to help him out. I don't know if it's something where he just has like a mental coach that can help him shift his mindset when he's not at home, but he's going to figure it out, or at least he's going to put in the effort to figure it out.
I am a mobile home, Ryan.
Okay.
And whenever he goes on the road, he just takes that with him.
Make him take an RV to all playoff games.
There you go.
John Madden style.
It was kind of vexing that his home and road splits were so bad.
It's true.
Like, so
he was
star.
both Stuart Skinners. Yeah, at the same time. But like, other than that, like, Cole Perfetti is only 23.
Yeah.
Right. And still on his way up. He had some fantastic playoff games. The thing with the Jets was that like all their players were kind of older. Like if you look at their forwards, it's like 32, 28, 32, 31, 23 is Cole Perfetti.
Wow.
32, 32, 37. And then David Gustafson is 25. Jared Anderson Dolan, 25. But those guys aren't like main cast members. Gabe Velarde's 25. He's an RFA. But like they need sort of a youthful infusion. And, I think development has not always been great for them. You think about some of the young players like a Ville Heinola, who never quite got there with the Jets. Cole Perfetti is definitely getting there. But I think Winnipeg, they're sort of at that point where they are really good. It's sort of like, okay, well, what's the missing piece?
Another team that got a little better in the Central, Utah.
Yeah.
Brandon Tanev signing.
Oh, we're going to Jared.
Well, Jared, come on. Break the news already.
I can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
But Brandon Tanev, I am hearing from about 5 feet to my left, is going to the Utah Mammoth.
The Mammoth.
The Mammoth.
I had to pause there for a second. The Utah, and then you think,
Utah Saints.
You know what? That would have been a perfect guy for the Leafs, especially when you think about 3 years times $2.5 million. He could have played with his brother Chris. I just don't get it, Ryan. I thought Tanev was going to go to Toronto at the deadline. You look at what they signed him for. Oh boy, that's a good deal for a guy that brings speed, a bit of grit. Obviously can play anywhere in your lineup, but is essentially a bottom six guy. Do you like Brandon Tanev?
Yeah. I like players that know who they are.
Yeah.
Right? And then I like teams that know who those players are. And I think what we've seen from Utah so far, and I mean, granted, again, we're just a couple of hours into free agency, but they've already made the Peterka trade. So their top six now looks more threatening than it has been, where Peterka comes in, you already have Clayton Keller, who quietly puts up a bunch of points every year.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of like, well, he was in Arizona. Like people weren't paying attention to the on-ice stuff. It was all about the off-ice stuff. Logan Cooley, still a young center who's starting to figure it out at the NHL level, right? And then, Dylan Guenther still on his way up. So their top six.
He was so good in the beginning of the season too.
So good, right?
Yeah.
So it's like all of a sudden you have a team where, let's not forget, their defense core got killed by injury at the beginning of last season, right? So when healthy, they should be even better, led by Mikhail Sergachev, obviously. But like John Marino, like you get a full year of John Marino, how different is that team?
Right.
Sean Dursey is like a nice kind of like sneaky good player. And, they take Caleb Denoyer, 4th overall in the draft. Probably best for him to play one more year of junior, or I don't know if he's interested in NCAA. He would be the type of player I think might make the leap simply because he dominated the Quebec League. So you say to yourself, like, well, what else do I need to accomplish?
And you're okay playing him as a third line center because that's kind of like he's going to be a two-way center, right? Who's going to be winning faceoffs for you, going to be probably killing some penalties.
Potentially.
A second line, maybe, I don't know what
I think you hope he's you got to hope he's second line for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, if you have to start him out as a third line center, it's not a stretch. It's not like you're saying, hey, highly skilled guy, play a check and roll.
Totally. Yeah. I guess my only concern with Utah right now is that their centers are small. Like between Nick Schmaltz and Logan Cooley, like those are small. Like that's the good thing about Denoyer is he's already like 6'1", 6'2".
Right.
So once he fills out, he would be more the profile of a number one center, and you hope he gets there. But having said that, I like their forwards better now. The defense core is pretty solid when they're all healthy. And Karl Vejmelka might be the most underrated goaltender in the league.
I was going to say, their goaltending is sound. We were talking about what team would a Jake Allen fit on. Maybe the Utah would have been a perfect fit, but you still got Connor Ingram there.
Right. And he can give you some starts. But Vejmelka, he just goes about his business. He's really good. So Utah is an interesting team to watch because, again, like they had the honeymoon season where it's like, hey, new team, that's a lot of fun.
I
They
wanted
made a
them.
push.
I wanted them to make a big splash. This isn't a big splash, but it's
A medium splash.
It's noticeable, and
Yeah.
it might be enough to get them into a playoff spot. Like they still have some work to do because essentially, there got to be a wild card team.
And I
who
will
else is in that
say,
division?
I will say they have two massive Russians who have now come over, Dmitry Simashev and Daniel Boot, who were both first rounders. It was one of the shocking first rounders a couple of years ago when they went high on both those guys. But they're both massive human beings, one forward, one defense. So now you're getting some sort of elite depth there where you got some more options. Simashev, a great skating defenseman. Boot, obviously a huge scoring forward. So again, your top six or at least your middle six looking a little more intimidating. And then on the back end, you're adding another weapon where, he's obviously very mobile, more of a shutdown guy, but you do have guys like Marino and Sergachev and even Dursey that can get you the goals and the offense from the blue line if you need it. But Simashev will be interesting to watch this year to see, can he make an immediate impact or will either of those guys need AHL time?
Okay. Like I mentioned, we are in Rooston Sports. Not just hockey sticks are made here. While players are making moves this free agency, Ryan, let's give a shout out to a Canadian brand that's been rock solid for 50 years. That's Grey Owl Paddles. Started back in 1975, now powered by Rooston Sports. They've been making handcrafted paddles that actually hold up. Whether you're out for a chill weekend paddle or going full send on the water, they've got the history, the quality, and now a fresh new look with a new site to match. Check out Grey Owl Paddles, built to perform, built to last. Ryan, when's the last time you were on a canoe, by the way?
Probably at a cottage, maybe like 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's usually. The fun thing about a canoe is you can jump out of a canoe. Try getting back into it.
I can't jump back in.
You cannot get back in. There's no leverage, Ryan.
It's very true.
Yeah. Speaking of leverage, Jared, can you leverage Twitter for us or X and tell us what's the
latest?
What's the latest, man?
Okay, let's go through it. So first up, could we see an offer sheet? And the person's name floating around right now is none other than Buffalo Sabres defenseman Bowen Byram. And the number floating around, which is even more important, is $7 million. An offer sheet at $7 million would incur a penalty of a first-round pick and a third-round pick. And Ryan, we've got a pretty big draft coming up next year. Is that a risk teams are willing to look at? More in terms of the return for Keandre Miller, we're looking at most likely a draft pick or multiple draft picks going back to the New York Rangers. And then just a couple minor signings. We have Jordan Harris going to Boston, Sammy Bellet to Montreal, David Rittich to the Islanders, Capo Kakinen to Montreal, and Nick Bjugstad, I think, was a sneaky deal by the St. Louis Blues at just $1.75 a year. And last but not least, Martin Ferivari, extension, 7 years, $42 million.
Let's start with Byram. Would you offer him $7 million?
I think I would.
Would you?
Again, in the new economy, would you offer Bowen Byram 6 or 5.5?
I don't know. I'm not so sure what Byram is. Like, I know he was a high draft pick. I know that
he should be an offensively inclined defenseman.
Yeah, but I haven't seen the offense really from him, and I get it. Like, he's been playing, and most of his career was in Colorado, where you're behind not only Cale Makar but Devon Tays
and Samuel Girard.
I guess. Yeah, he wins a cup in Colorado. Didn't really, make a huge impact during that cup run, but I thought that the numbers were going to come up now that he's in Buffalo. And again, you got Rasmus Dahlin, you got Owen Power, you've got Samuelson. No.
Well, Matthias Samuelson's a shutdown guy, so
okay,
I wouldn't worry about that. But Dahlin and Owen Power,
not seeing the numbers
right
from him here. Like,
no,
7 goals, 38 points in 82 games this year. Yeah, what am I missing? Like, why would you make the deal? Just because he's going to be 25 in about a week.
Yeah, I think you make that deal because you say to yourself, he had some injury problems early on that probably stunted his development a little bit. but we saw the high end. And when he was on, he was really good. And he is a player that can get you some offense. They can move the puck up the ice. And he's obviously had some pretty good mentors along the way. If you think about playing under Makar, you guys have that in Colorado. So I think if you're a team, you say, okay, well, you know what? It didn't work out in Buffalo, but it doesn't work out for a lot of players in Buffalo. And they go on to be Sam Reinhart, or they go on to be Linus Ullmark,
or Evan Rodriguez,
or well, I mean, we knew Jack Eichel would be good, but you think about what Jack Eichel became in Vegas.
He went from a coach killer who was never going to win and was a terrible guy to have in your dressing room to everyone loves him.
Yeah,
and now Mitch Marner wants to play with him.
Right, and at one point he had never lost a playoff series in his life.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on who acquires Bowen Byram.
I was going to say, which team's looking at a Byram, do you think? Like, that could use a little offense.
From the back end.
I just, again.
I would say the Islanders. I know they re-signed Anthony DeAngelo.
Yeah.
But you lose Noah Dobson. To me, the Islanders would be a team where it's like, that's, like we've got like Pelech and Pollock, who are like the shutdown guys, right? Mm-hmm. Matthew Schaefer's the future. But, even if Matthew Schaefer makes the team right out of camp, which there's a degree of difficulty there because first he had mono, then he broke his collarbone. So he didn't play that many games this year. He is very advanced, so I wouldn't put it past him to go straight to the NHL. But even if he went straight to the NHL, would it not make the most sense development-wise to send him to the World Juniors again in the middle of the season to dominate, to help Canada, get back to the medal round first and win gold?
I won't even start there.
Yeah, exactly. Would it not make the most sense for him to find out what the NHL is like, then take that break, play against his peer group, dominate, hone his skills, then come back? So if you bring in a Bowen Byram, I think you can sort of test different channels there where it's like, okay, what happens if Bowen Byram is our QB, our QB power play or power play QB? What happens if we try Matthew Schaefer there? What happens if neither of them are there, where maybe it's DeAngelo, maybe it's 5 forwards? Although I don't know if I can name 5 Islanders that I would want to see on a power play other than Matt Barzal and Anders Lee. But I don't know. Apparently, like maybe that would be an interesting one.
The only thing I'd be worried about is if you have to give a first-round pickup for him, that Islanders team's going to be pretty bad again this year.
Fair.
So you could be giving up a chance at your boy Gavin McKenna.
That is true.
Which I don't think you want to get. Obviously, it would be. I know you can't protect it if it's an offer sheet.
Good point. It has to be your own. It has to be your own first rounder.
Some of the other teams apparently interested in making a trade happen or even an offer sheet are Calgary, Vegas,
of course,
because they just lost Petro.
Yeah.
L.A., St. Louis, of course, because they'd offer sheet his mom, right? And then another team, Colorado. Would they bring back Bowen Byram? They just lost Ryan Lindgren.
I can't see. I mean,
they're not going to care about that first round pick because you're going to be in the playoffs. That pick is probably going to be in the 20s.
It's very true. Oh man,
you know what he is.
Yeah. So funny to think that they traded him for like Casey Middlestat.
Yeah.
It's like they were like, we want a do-over. We're bringing you back, Bo. We're sorry. We didn't mean it.
Of those teams that we just mentioned, Calgary, Vegas, LA, St. Louis, and now Colorado, you know what? I'm kind of leaning towards Colorado.
Interesting.
If I had to do it.
I'm wondering, because Calgary, there's the talk that Rasmus Anderson's leaving.
Right.
So if you're the Flames and you are thinking or knowing that you're going to lose Anderson one way or another, do you offer sheet Bowen Byram to make sure that you have a player that can get the puck up the ice for you?
Yeah. He's from Cranbrook, BC.
Yeah.
Canucks, man. Or do they need another Quinn Hughes there?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Or is Cranbrook on the other side?
No idea. I've been to Vancouver. That's about as far as I went. I was in 2010 for the Olympics. That was the last time I was there.
Cranbrook. Is it in the interior? Is he maybe a Flames fan?
This is what matters.
This is our TSN Llamas part of the segment. It's actually much closer to Calgary.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay, so let's send him off to Calgary.
Yeah, send him to Calgary.
His family can go
send him
watch
home.
him play.
That's right.
What do you think of Calgary? Did they take a step forward, step back?
I think they take a step back. I think they were a great story this year.
Yeah. So many teams around them were terrible. I think that also helped.
Yeah, I also think that shooters are going to go after Dustin Wolf. And now that they've all seen him, they're going to start picking corners and figuring it out. We always talk about sophomore slumps with skaters.
Yeah.
Usually we don't talk about it with goalies because goalies tend to come along so gradually. But with Dustin Wolf, the Flames needed him right away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was good enough that he was a Calder finalist, and he had a decent amount of starts. But I do think that it's going to be harder for him to surprise teams with how – I mean, he is very good. But I do think teams are going to be prepared now, and they're going to say, okay, how can we pick apart Dustin Wolf? And then from there, I mean, he was one of the best players, if not the best player.
Calder Trophy winning goaltenders don't tend to, have that linear progression like Steve Mason.
Steve Mason was the last one.
Andrew Raincroft.
Yeah.
Jim Carey.
Mm-hmm.
None of those guys, were that good.
Jim Carey was like out of the league in a few years, if I'm not mistaken.
Andrew Raycroft ended up going to Toronto where he wasn't very good.
For Tuukka Rask. Let's not forget that.
We are going to be joined in about 15 minutes by Kelsey Cermak, our Pittsburgh Penguins site editor. I'm curious to see what Pittsburgh does or doesn't do. Obviously, it's been a few years since they've been in the playoffs now. Sidney Crosby is not getting younger, although you wouldn't know it based on how good he's playing. He's going to be back at the Olympics. Is it kind of a travesty that the Penguins aren't better because they've got Crosby?
It's a travesty that they didn't rebuild like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Like they needed to.
It's not happening anymore.
With every year that they don't rebuild, it becomes harder to rebuild.
Yeah.
Because it's like, now Sidney Crosby's 37. Now he's 38. It's like they should have done it. It wouldn't have taken long, right? But their pipeline has been so barren for so many years that like there's no one to help out. So they can bring in free agents here and there, but they're never going to be the high-end guys. So it is unfortunate, but like I said, like they should have rebuilt like 3 or 4 years ago. They should have said like, okay, we're not good enough.
Yeah.
We don't have to be bad for long, but let's get a couple of high picks. Let's trade some guys for assets. And then if you have to flip those draft picks later on to bolster your roster, fair enough, do that. But like how different would that team look if they got like a Will Smith, for example, right? I'm not even saying Max Celebrini. I'm saying if they had like a couple of top 5 picks that could have paid off either this year or next year, or even last year for that matter, how different would things be? Because Crosby is still going to be great. I mean, Malkin has kind of fallen off the map, which does not help.
No. There's some trade rumors involving Malkin as well. I don't know if they're going to materialize, but
would he want to go anywhere?
I don't know. It feels like if Crosby's not going anywhere, he's not going anywhere, and neither is Letang.
Right.
It's like similar to like when the Toronto Maple Leafs were trying to move on from Matt Sundin, and he's like, no. And then all of a sudden the Muskoka 5 were like, well, none of us are going.
Right.
So, if Crosby's there, I can't imagine Malkin going, oh, yeah, see, I want to win now.
Yeah, exactly.
They've won 3 cups together.
Yeah.
Like they're pretty cozy.
Yeah.
Let's do a favorite. Okay, so obviously the Florida Panthers just won the Stanley Cup.
Mm-hmm.
They get another day with the cup or weekend with the cup. I think technically they get 48 hours. I don't have that many. Like, how many cup celebrations have you been invited to? Because I was
none.
Really? Okay. So I went to Dave Boland's parade in Toronto,
cool.
Which was very boring. And then I was, as part of like my research for my book, I got to go to Matt Murray's cup celebration in Thunder Bay, which involved him taking it to a local arena and then just watching movies with his, I guess, then girlfriend, and eating popcorn out of it.
Just them at the arena?
No, it was like a lot of people from Thunder Bay, which, when I say a lot of people, probably wasn't a lot of people.
Right.
Two very boring stories there. What's your favorite one that you've maybe even heard of?
Yeah, I mean, just hearing of people eating stuff out of the cup is always fun, cereal and things like that.
Yeah.
The dog food was the worst. I think that was Clark Gillies, where it just feels really disrespectful. But yeah, people eating cereal and stuff out of it. I think there was somebody on Florida who had already eaten cereal out of it last year, and it might have been Sam Bennett, and somebody asked him after the cup. They're like, "Hey, you're gonna do it again?" He's like, "Yeah, maybe I'll do like a different cereal this time or whatever."
So excited.
I also, when babies get baptized in it, that's fun.
That's pretty good.
I like that one. I also did hear a story of it. Well, this wasn't with somebody's day with the cup, but when Dallas won it, somebody pitched it off a balcony at Pantera's house, and it missed the pool.
Yeah.
And hit the concrete.
It's amazing how much it's been banged up over the years, and it's still the same cup.
The funniest thing is like, I know some people are like, oh, it's like, people don't respect it when it's getting out, because I think the Panthers dinged it up already.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, keep in mind, I think it was the Ottawa Silver 7, like pre-NHL, left it under a bridge, like overnight.
Wasn't it Mario's pool too, at the bottom of his pool?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's always great.
So it's been wild for like over 100 years.
Imagine it's a lot of pressure when you've got it for 48 hours, because you want to do the community thing.
Yep.
And that's why I say, like, I've been part of a lot of boring ones where they're just like, hey, come see it. It's at a local hockey rink, or we're going to parade it down Main Street.
Yeah.
But then you also want to do something kind of fun and wacky, like whether it's the Finns who always take it into a sauna.
That's probably the worst for it. It's
Yeah.
like expanding and contracting.
So if you had one day with the cup, what would you have you given it any thought? Like, what would you do with it that's kind of cool and unique?
That's a great question. Maybe something where I was like flying through the air or something. Have you ever done those
skydiving with it now?
Not skydiving, but like those reverse. Have you ever done that like reverse bungee thing where you're in that like chair and they shoot you up in the air?
Like the biggest whip. I would never do that.
Oh, okay. I did that. I think somebody took it on a roller coaster.
I would do that.
Yeah.
Not like.
But reverse bungee, if you strapped it in, that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, I would take it on the Mind Buster, I guess.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of doable.
Yeah, I wonder if the keepers are like only wooden roller coasters, nothing with a loop.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like if you took it upside down, then it's like a fair game.
Yeah, that's right.
Like my kid dragged me on Yukon Striker years ago, and I was like, I just had my eyes closed the entire time. But you'd want to hold on to the cup.
You would, yeah,
and have a good picture where your eyes are open. So
very true.
I'd be terrible with that.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah. I guess it's boring. You win it 2 years in a row. It's like now you got to think of a second thing to do. Speaking of cups, aside from Florida, who would you rank? Like, let's come up with 5 each. Your front runners to win the cup next year. So let's both take Florida off the table, and we got 4 others. So
okay, I'm gonna say LA.
LA.
Yeah, and it's not because they've made like the biggest splashes. Although it's funny, it kind of feels like picking Corey Perry is a bit of a cheat code because it's now 5 out of 6 years he's been in the final. Okay. I know he hasn't won any of those, but he did get there. And I was already thinking about LA coming into free agency, and it just feels like the timing's good for them.
Okay.
I do think, here, we'll go 1-1. So
you almost need the perfect mix of old guys and young guys who are on entry-level deals, or at least still having...
Or bridge deals.
Yeah, or still haven't maximized.
Yeah. So I think Byfield and Clark would count for the Kings in that regard.
Okay, I'm going to stay in the West. I'm going to say Vegas, the easy pick.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing that would just rub salt in the wound than Mitch Marner winning a cup his first year out of Toronto, and just kind of sticking it to them, saying, "Oh, I'm the reason you guys didn't win." Conn Smythe, guys.
Right.
So it's going to happen. It's similar to like whenever Buffalo loses a guy, right?
Right.
Okay, so we got
LA, Vegas.
So we got LA, Vegas, Florida. Let's come up with 2 others.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna go back to the well and say New Jersey.
Really?
I am, because I just
felt
like
not picking Dallas. This is like the first time Ryan's not picking Dallas to win a cup.
Well, I guess I'm a little disillusioned with how things went. And like, I kind of feel like Jason Robertson is not a playoff guy. I need to be proven otherwise at this point. And maybe because Rupi Hintz got hurt again, And Ruby Hintz really seems to be the key to unlocking Jason Robertson.
Right.
But it just feels like, Marchment's gone. They re-signed Jamie Benn, albeit for like peanuts. So that's fine.
It's a good signing.
I guess if it's only $1 million, that's cool. But I mean, he struggled in the playoffs, did not produce. So I'm worried that they've like maxed out that window. Maybe I'm wrong. I still want my all barbecue Stanley Cup final, Dallas versus Carolina.
Well, that's who I'm going with. That's my last pick. Is I'm picking the Carolina Hurricanes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just feel like eventually it's going to happen. And who were we talking that they just got on the back end?
Keandre Miller.
He might be the guy to unlock it all.
Possibly.
I'm still not sold on their goaltending.
Yeah. I also worry, much like Winnipeg, that they're a system team, which helps them win the regular season. But when they get figured out in the playoffs, which keeps happening, they don't have an answer. They don't have a backup where it's like, okay, so-and-so is going to carry us over the mountain.
Right.
Like Sebastian Aho's like okay in that regard, but he's not putting up like 27 points in 12 games or anything like that.
No, and they got Stankoven, but again,
like give him time.
I don't know how much you can expect.
Yeah, exactly. And he was one of their best players. Like when he was playing with Jordan Stahl and Jordan Martinook, that was their best line by a country mile. And that wasn't supposed to be their top line.
Do you think, like you mentioned, they're a systems team, do you think they have to move on from Brind'Amour? Or do you think that there's a possibility that happens if Tulsky doesn't like what he's seeing out of them at some point this year?
I think if they fail again, you have to think about it. I guess I would just like to see a little more flexibility where they need to be more adaptable, right? And maybe this is the year that it happens. Maybe they look at last year and be like, okay, once again, we couldn't score at all.
Yeah.
Once we got past a round or two. Why is that? It can't be a coincidence. Yeah. It was, Florida, it was the Rangers before that. Like, why are we hitting these roadblocks?
Yeah. Why are superstars not wanting to play here?
Right.
Whether it's Mikko Rantanen, whether it's Jake Gensel.
Or if the rumors were true, Marner didn't want to go there.
Yeah. It's because creativity is not what Brind'Amour coaches.
Right.
Yeah.
You can win, but you can't thrive in that sort of individualistic way. And you look at what Rantanen did for Dallas in the playoffs, there was literally like a couple of weeks where he took over completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Before Kelsey joins us, we're going to go back to the Twitterverse with Jared Ostroff. Jared, what do you got there?
Well, let's start with the Pittsburgh Penguins, since we have Kelsey coming on to join us. We've got a rumor saying that Anthony Mantha could be on his way to Pittsburgh. More officially, we have Parker Wotherspoon signing a 2-year, $1 million deal with Pittsburgh. Some other minor stuff trickling in, but let's start with Pittsburgh.
So Anthony Mantha.
I mean, here's a player that his entire career has been about potential, right? Huge frame.
Yeah, when you're that big.
Great goal scorer in
junior. You're going to be the next big power forward, right?
Yeah, and whether it's injuries or inconsistency, it just hasn't happened. I think for Pittsburgh, it's worth trying.
Yeah.
Because again, like you don't have a pipeline, so you need to go elsewhere, and that's sort of the problem in Pittsburgh is they don't have fallback plans other than a guy like Anthony Mantha, who at best he scored 25 goals in the NHL in a season.
Yeah.
Certainly a far cry from when he was in junior, where he literally had a goal per game 1 year.
Well, I just remember him from the World Juniors. Like I'm looking at his World Junior stats here. That one tournament, 5 goals, 11 points in 7 games. Back, did they win that year, 2014?
Sure, why not?
So long ago. I want to say that was like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was on that team, so probably not.
No, I was going to say he lost because that was at UFA.
Yeah,
I remember that was the lockout one.
Yeah. Favorite tournament?
Maybe because it was just so weird. Yeah, being in Russia was weird.
I like that Finland one that you and I covered.
Oh yeah,
where Finland had Laine, Pojärvi, and Aho, and Matthews was there, Marner was there. It was a star-studded one, and Canada, like this year, they finished well out of the rankings or well out of the medal rounds.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else happening right now? This is such
Nate Schmidt to Utah.
Oh wow!
On a 3-year deal. So once again, Utah adding another defenseman.
I know we're going to go later on in the show in terms of our early winners and losers, but Utah's got to be in the winner camp for me.
And I think this is also sort of a fail-safe, right? Where, again, they lost 2 defensemen for a big chunk of last season, and it really hampered their efforts to make the playoffs.
Right.
So this is like, okay, well, Nate Schmidt.
He's such a good guy to have in the room, too.
For sure. And now he's a Stanley Cup winner.
Yeah. So it's funny, like we're talking about all the Florida Panthers that stuck around and Nate Schmidt, who got the Cup first.
That's right.
Like, I don't know how many people were thinking Nate Schmidt was going to get the Stanley Cup first because, we were trying to think about who was going to get it.
I'll tell you
Marchand was going to get it.
I'll tell you who. The hockey news. In our playoff preview, Ken Campbell, who did the Florida Panthers team story, we always do who's going to get the first Cup pass. Ken Campbell said Nate Schmidt. Wow. So if you go to tha.com/free and pick up the hockey news and go to our digital archive, go to playoff preview, you can see that Nate Schmidt was supposed to be the first guy to get the Cup pass.
And you made a good point about that. You said that's a team that really understands how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And they literally went, all right, who's the longest serving NHLer who has not won? Nate Schmidt.
Yeah.
All right, who's number 2? Who's number 3?
Yeah.
And it didn't matter if you were an important player or a bit piece. If you've met the requirement, you're getting it.
Evan Cormier got the Cup before Sam Bennett.
Which is insanity.
Yeah. And I guarantee nobody was complaining.
No, and that's probably speaks to their culture and just kind of the way they are.
Yeah.
All right. So we are getting close to being joined by Kelsey Cermak, who's going to be talking about all the moves that Kyle Dubas has been making or has not been making. Anything else kind of strike you as odd this free agency in terms of movers and shakers, Ryan?
Well, honestly, I would say the big storyline so far has been the lack of big name signings. And maybe that's a result of teams retaining their guys or doing sign and trades, as we've seen a couple of. But I do think that this was kind of expected in the sense of, and I think it might have actually been Kyle Dubas who pointed this out to a reporter the other day, with the cap going up, teams can now save their guys, right? They don't have to lose them via free agency. And I think that's probably why we haven't seen a lot of big names off the board, and the ones we have, like a Brock Besser, went back to the team that they were with already in Vancouver. So really, I mean, it's become like the Nikolai Ehlers derby. Otherwise,
do you think next year that's going to have the same impact? Because next year, like we mentioned, Jack Eichel, Connor McDavid, Artemi Panarin, Kirill Kaprizov, Sergei Bobrovsky,
Kempe.
Like, there's a lot of names, and there was some talk already going into this July 1 that some teams are, pocketing some money and saying, all right, I'm going to save this for a rainy day, a la 2026.
Yeah. And then, I mean,
there might not be anyone available if it's so easy to resign your guys.
I was going to say, I think the teams that already have those guys under contract are saying, we do not want to lose some of the best players in the NHL off our rosters. Now, in some cases, there might be resets where it makes sense for a guy to leave, and Bobrovsky, who knows? Like, maybe he just retires.
Yeah, he's getting up there too, isn't he?
He's probably like 38 at this point.
Yeah,
he's had a very long and distinguished career, and now he's won 2 Stanley Cups in a row. So we'll see what happens next season. But
2 Stanley Cups, 2 Vezinas, I believe.
Yeah,
easy Hall of Famer for me.
At this point, I would agree. Yes.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, like, of the guys who are supposed to be coming up next year, how many get extensions?
That's the thing, right? How many of them actually get to free agency?
Well, how many get extensions like this week?
Yeah. I'm sure if you're Edmonton, you're like, hey, Connor, anytime, But if you're Connor McDavid, I think you say, like, well, I've got time to think about this.
What's there to think about, though? Like, really?
Is that where he wants? Is that his best opportunity to win?
Ooh.
That's what he has to think about at this point, right? Because he's going to play at the Olympics.
Yeah.
He could very well win a gold medal. Then he's basically done everything except win a Stanley Cup.
And you know what? When we're talking about the Mount Rushmore of hockey greats, and obviously Connor McDavid already is sneaking onto that list. That includes probably Gretzky or
Lemieux.
Ooh, you got Lemieux on your list. For me, it's Crosby.
I mean, it's a fantastic debate. I'd love to have both of them.
Okay, but McDavid probably is going to end up on that list.
Yeah, I mean,
with a cup at least.
With a cup, because if you're comparing McDavid and Crosby, and McDavid doesn't have a cup and Crosby's got 3, it's sort of like, well,
it was the one.
Doesn't really matter how many points you had.
It was the one knock all the time when you were talking about Alex Ovechkin,
right?
So, we're talking about Pittsburgh, and we don't have Kelsey yet. Okay,
but we see her. Yeah, but in Ovechkin, you're totally right. Like, that was kind of the knock. And even if you think about it, way back in the day, that was the knock on Steve Yzerman until he became a winner and got multiple cups himself with the Red Wings.
Yeah, like with Ovechkin, I thought for sure, if he doesn't win a cup, there's always going to be that talk. Is he one of the greats? Is he not? Is he just a guy who's a me-first player? And then he wins the cup, and all of that just dispersed. And it was like, oh, yeah, greatest goal scorer of all time and a guy who's won a cup.
Yeah.
So it does help out. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go to Kelsey. We're having some technical difficulties with her connection. But let's talk about the Penguins a little bit more in depth here. Let's just talk about wildcard teams. How about that?
Sure.
We were saying, it looks like we could probably, already set in stone the 3 teams from the Atlantic and the 3 teams from the Metro. You were saying that obviously Ottawa's got a great chance of being that wildcard team. Detroit is another team that's in the mix, possibly Washington. With Ottawa, is it fair to say that they've done enough last year with, making the playoffs and then giving Toronto a bit of a run after being down 3-0, that they should be, a playoff team next year? Is it fair to say that they'll take another step, or are they still going to be in the mix of things where they can miss?
They should be in the mix. The only reason I wouldn't guarantee them a spot is because of the teams around them, such as Montreal, Detroit, Boston as well, right? Like, I know we're down on Boston, but it's like Boston's on the way down, but they're still in the sort of like middle. Right? They haven't completely dropped off until we see them drop off.
Hey,
right?
I wrote them off like 2 years ago, and then they ended up being just a juggernaut.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't lose at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. So I think Ottawa, because keep in mind, they just got Dylan Cousins, before the deadline in that deal for Josh Norris. And we saw some of the positives of Dylan Cousins already in the playoffs. But once he gets fully acclimated, I should say, to Ottawa, then you got a big center who can really be a difference maker. So I think Ottawa's in pretty good shape. They have a goalie. They have a nice young core. Sure, they can add, but I think they're in a good spot.
Okay. We do have Kelsey now.
Right.
So we're going to go live to Pittsburgh, where we've got Penguins site editor Kelsey Cermak.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, Kelsey. How are you?
I'm great. Active day. How are you?
We're doing okay. We're kind of curious as what kind of offseason it's going to be for the Penguins. Obviously, this is a team that, they're not quite committed to the rebuild, as we all know. When you've got Sidney Crosby and company, you never quite are going to be in a rebuild mode. But, are you seeing enough out of the Penguins where we can start penciling them in as a wild card threat?
I'm not sure that that's going to be the case this season. Even in Dubas's postseason presser, he even said that he'd be surprised if the Penguins made the playoffs this season. So I think this is one of those cases where you're going to see the Penguins selling high on a lot of guys. There's been a lot of discussion around Brian Rust, Rickard Rakell, and there are going to be 2 names to keep an eye on in the next couple days, especially, with all these teams that are going to miss out on the bigger free agent signings. They're pretty good gets for $5 million annually, so for 3 more years. But in terms of next season for the playoffs, I think it's probably a long shot. But you can never count out a team that's young and that's trying to build more youth talent. So we'll see.
I think we lost Kelsey for the time being. Kelsey, can you hear us? We lost Kelsey.
Oh, now
she
we got a thumbs up now.
Kelsey, I don't know if you heard Ryan's question there, but he was asking about getting Malkin and the potential of possibly him being moved. When we're talking about the Penguins and the core, it's always Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. Are they entertaining the offers of what a trade for Malkin could look like? And do you think Evgeny would be even interested in that?
I'm gonna have to say no on both fronts. I don't think it's something that they'd completely discount at the trade deadline if Malkin, say, wanted to go to a contender. Dubas did mention on Monday that they're gonna have discussions with Malkin, around the All-Star break, around the Olympic break, just to see where he's at, what his plans are for next season. But he also mentioned, Malkin's a cornerstone piece of this franchise. He has been for the last 20 years. And I think that they're going to kind of let him go out on his terms. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, Dubas said he's going to reconvene with him around the trade deadline. But as far as I can tell, I think 71 is going to retire Penguin. But you never know. This team's trying to get as young as possible. So I wouldn't rule it out if he wants to go to contender.
Yeah. And we know, obviously, Sidney Crosby is not going anywhere, but we also know that he has a lot of influence on what the Penguins do. So where's he at right now? Is Sidney Crosby sort of recognizing that this team needs to take a step back and get younger, at least in the short term? What do you expect the Penguins to do? We've seen them make a couple of, I would say, random signings today. Not necessarily impact guys, but what can we expect the sort of final product to look like when we get to training camp?
I think this is going to be very much a year where they're going to see what they have with some of these guys that are up and coming, the Rucker McGroartys, the Ville Koivunens. I think a lot of those kinds of guys are going to fill out the roster. They're going to make it competitive by making some of these smaller signings. But in terms of Sidney Crosby, I think he's at a point where he understands where the team is at, and he's kind of embracing this mentorship role. We saw several times last season that Crosby took extra time after practice to work with some of these young guys, and he was doing that on, a daily basis. So he's really embracing this mentorship role, embracing the transition. But obviously, he's a competitive guy, the most competitive guy out there. He wants to win. And I think that's why Dubas keeps reiterating that they want to get this turned around as quickly as possible. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a mix of veterans, youth, some of these signings that they hope to, flip at the deadline or get some value for in terms of assets later on. But I don't think they want to dump everyone. So we'll kind of see a mix of it. But I think some of these up and comers are going to get a real shot at the roster, and they'd love nothing more than for Sid to mentor those guys because he really loves that part of this too. So
yeah, Penguins have a new head coach in Dan Muse. I imagine a lot of what the season's going to look like is going to be dependent on how Dan works the young guys in and balances the whole development and trying to be competitive. What are you expecting out of Dan Muse's first season in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, if you look up and down the staff too, I mean, this is kind of, I don't want to say a newer staff, but it's a staff that doesn't have a whole lot of combined NHL experience. You look at Nick Bonino, who was brought onto the staff. This is his first coaching role, period, around the NHL and developmental leagues. He coached a little bit overseas last year. But obviously Todd Nelson has a little bit of experience. So, they're bringing in some of these guys on the assistant side that have a little bit of NHL experience, but it's kind of like a very developmental focus for the entire coaching staff. So I think we're going to see that. Dan Muse has a lot of experience with the USHL program and just USA hockey in general. He's been a part of those developmental leagues for a long time. So I think this focus on youth and development is going to be really, really evident in terms of Muse's coaching. I think we're going to see some of these younger guys have a longer leash, maybe get some opportunities. And I'm curious to see, how that works with the veterans in the room too. Because obviously Crosby, Letang, Malkin, these guys are used to a winning culture. Mike Sullivan brought that for years. So it'll be interesting to see how that messaging kind of meshes with these veterans too.
So Kelsey, one more question for us here. Like I said, Pittsburgh's made a couple of moves already, but what do you think is still on the top of the shopping list for free agency in terms of the type of player, or maybe a specific player that they might be targeting right now?
I think Dubas kind of said it yesterday during his presser after introducing the 2025 draft class. I think they're still going to focus on that left defense. They obviously signed Witherspoon to that 2-year, $1 million annual contract earlier today. And I still think they're going to sign a few more guys to have a few in the mix there. Dubas basically said that they're not going to go after any big names. You're not going to see them make any big splashes. So I think this is going to be a situation where they'll sign probably a few defensemen, like I said, left side defensemen, in hopes that they kind of battle it out for some roster spots, because they do have a few young guys, Owen Pickering, kind of guys that have underperformed, Ryan Graves, Ryan Shea's kind of like a third pairing guy. So they really don't have two guys in that top 4 that are solidified on the left side. So I think they're going to sign a few people to give them a chance to have a bigger role in Pittsburgh.
To join us to break down the Penguins offseason and what we can expect for next year. For those who are reading at home, you can check out all of Kelsey's work at thn.com/Pittsburgh. Thanks again, Kelsey. We're almost wrapping up this 3-hour live free agency frenzy, Ryan, and we've got some more news happening in the Twitterverse. Jared, what can you tell us about what's shaking up?
Okay, in the 10 or so minutes you guys were talking with Kelsey, Ken Holland spent over $10 million. The question is, who do you spend that money on? We've got Cody Ceci for 4 years at $4.5 million. We have Brian Dumoulin at 3 years with an average salary of $4 million a year, and some goaltending depth, Anton Forsberg at 2.25. And then just switching lanes, how about the Panthers, the rich getting richer, adding Jeff Petrie at a veterans minimum under $1 million. That could be a sneaky good signing, especially in the playoffs. Then we've got some from the Red Wings and Bruins. Red Wings add former Ottawa Senators Jacob Bernard Docker and veteran James Van Riemsdyk. And then the Bruins add Sean Corrali back at 1.85 for 2 years, and Mikey Eismont. In a similar deal, 2 years, 1.45.
Interesting. Let's start with LA. Getting Cody Ceci and Brian Dumoulin as well as Anton Forsberg and net. It's a lot for Ceci, but again, you keep mentioning with the salary cap, it's not that much, I guess.
Like $3 million.
Yeah. Do you like those moves?
I don't mind those moves. I like them as a tandem, which is to say, it strikes me that Ken Holland is saying, I want the depth that my team needs to make a long run. Because, again, we know Drew Doughty and Brant Clark are kind of the high end.
Yeah.
And they did lose Gavrikov to free agency to the Rangers. So that was a big blow in terms of minutes. So you bring in Cody Ceci and Brian Dumoulin, veterans who have kind of been through it all. And I know Cody Ceci, he kind of gets wrapped a bit. But you know what? I mean, he's played some good minutes in the past, especially thinking about that Edmonton run 2 years ago.
Which Holland would be, he had a front seat for.
Exactly. He saw it right there. So I think if you're bringing in guys where it's like, you just don't want to get caught with not enough depth.
It feels like those are the kind of moves, though, you make at the trade deadline, not in free agency.
Fair.
But you could grab a Ceci, you could grab a Dumoulin and free agency for a third round pick or something.
Possibly. But here you didn't have to give up any picks.
Yeah.
So they're all free. So, I don't mind. And then Forsberg, obviously, his backup goalie. It's like you're going as far as Darcy Kemper can take you. So, it's just a matter of a guy that can get you 20-25 starts if you need him to.
Do you like Ken Holland as a GM, by the way? Because, he does have his detractors. I personally am a big fan of Ken Holland just because he fills a notebook like no other GM.
Totally.
You ask him one question, you're like, Ken, I only got 5 more minutes here. You've already been talking for 20 on that first question. But in terms of like why you would bring in Ken Holland, it's to be a closer. It's to get that team. You think, all right, I need to make sure this is a championship team. So far, is he doing enough for you?
I think
overall?
so. Yeah. And, you think about his tenure in Edmonton. Obviously, they didn't win it while he was there. But, he put in some of those building blocks. And I do like him. He's great with the media. But I also like him because he's very curious in terms of hockey, right? Like if you think about rule changes, experimenting, like when he was with the Red Wings and they held their Traverse City Prospects tournament every summer where they would have like 8 different teams come in with their rookies and play each other. Like that was the first time I ever saw 3-on-3 because they used it at that tournament. They brought in a former ref. It might've been Dave Jackson. And they were like, okay, let's try some stuff out. And it was funny because when I saw it the first time, I was like, we will never see this shootout again. But turns out that coaches and NHLers eventually figured it out.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it was super exciting. So I do like Ken Holland because I do think that he has that curiosity and he's always looking for new ways of thinking about things. So it's not like you have a guy who's just kind of resting on the Stanley Cups he won in the past.
No, and he's a good guy for culture. I don't think LA needed to bring in a guy who's going to bring in a championship culture.
Right.
Because let's face it, like, we're talking about modern day dynasties. Kings are always up there with the Blackhawks and I guess the Penguins. You probably put them in the Lightning and now the Panthers. So, a pretty nice tidy day for the Kings. Like they probably sought out to, bolster the back end a bit, improve the goaltending a bit, mostly work around the edges and get depth. And it looks like that's what they did. What were some of the other trades that we saw there? Like
Detroit's interesting.
Yeah.
JVR. Yeah.
A veteran.
Yeah, exactly. So now we got to look at Detroit.
They still have Justin Hall or they bought him out yet?
He's probably just in Grand Rapids or something. I don't know. But if you look at Detroit, like they re-signed Patrick Kane before July 1st. And then now JVR comes in. Oh, the Islanders signed Jonathan Drouin. Interesting.
Wow.
Maybe somebody Matt Barzal could have fun with, potentially. And then, the other Detroit signing, I'm trying to scroll down here. I think that the Red Wings are at that point now where it's like, okay, well, we have to make the playoffs this year, right? Like the Yzer plan has been going on for so long at this point.
Yeah, saying that for a while now.
We have been saying that for a while. So it's like, it gets like increasingly pressure packed with every given year. But the fact that,
they got a real goaltender now.
They got a real goaltender in
John
Gibson.
Yeah.
Lucas Raymond continues to get better. Marco Kasper continues to get better. Moritz Seider continues to get better. Simon Edvinsson is going to have more minutes. Dylan Larkin feels kind of ageless to me. Like I assumed by now Dylan Larkin would have taken a step back, but he might be getting better.
Such a good skater. I think that helps.
I think so, right? So in terms of like them adding, I do think like they're doing the right things now. And it's just a matter of, okay, will it all come together?
Yeah, and a lot of it's, I don't want to say out of their control, but let's face it, they're in a jam-packed Atlantic division that we just keep talking about where, you're going to have to leapfrog a playoff team to get into the playoffs. And whether that means Ottawa or a Toronto, let's face it, they could end up taking a step back and where they're a wildcard team or even worse. Austin Matthews, he does struggle with health. You take him out of the lineup now and you don't have a Mitch Marner. So maybe that gives Detroit the path to getting into the playoffs now.
I think the Leafs will be fine, but I understand your point.
I'm just trying to cause
chaos,
as much chaos in Toronto as possible, Ryan. And with that, let's go to our winners and losers.
Okay.
So who's in the winning category so far as we inch closer to the end of our frenzy here?
Oh, it was Jacob Bernard Docker was the other one.
Oh,
JBD. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a minor deadline. Yeah. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Utah. We mentioned him before. Getting JJ Peterka already, and then adding Brandon Tanev, adding Nate Schmidt. It feels like their depth is a lot better.
Yeah.
And it feels like their top 6 makes more sense now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, when you had Machelli, it just felt like it was like a lot of I think he was playing with Lawson Krause for a lot of the time. So it's like, no, that's not his job.
No.
But Brandon Tanev could play on a line with Lawson Krause, and that would make sense. So it feels
if
like
you're playing on a line with Lawson Krause, don't expect passes, just expect dump-ins.
There you go. And big hits.
Yeah.
You can watch him make big hits. So it feels like Utah makes a lot more sense now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were a pretty good team that had some pretty important guys missing from their lineup due to injury last year. So I think it's totally fair to see them as a potential wildcard team.
Okay. For me, and I agree with you, I think Utah is one of the big winners in the West. I'm going to say Vancouver is also a winner in my category or in my books because they went into free agency thinking that they were going to lose Brock Besser.
True.
Thinking that there was a chance that they might even lose a Thatcher Demko or have to move on from him, as well as a Connor Garland, who, earlier this year had already, was asking for a trade, and now he signs long term.
Mm-hmm.
My point being, they've made, what was just a nasty soap opera earlier in the year. It's now looking like a little bit more settled now.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm Quinn Hughes, I'm feeling good. I've got Adam Foote coming in as a coach who, he seems like he's going to be more of a player's coach. You've got a goaltender in Demko. You've got your sniper in Besser. It's not as bad of a situation. And we talked about it. We could see Vancouver making that leap now, whether they are a wild card team or, you never know what's going to happen with Edmonton in the regular season because they very much seem like the Florida Panthers where they don't even care where they end up. They're just like, as long as we're in the playoffs, that's fine. We'll just turn it on once we get there.
Right.
So I could see Vancouver either being one of the top 3 teams in the Pacific, but at the very worst, I think they're a wild card team.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And do you want to do losers?
Let's do losers.
Okay. I'm looking at Boston, and they did make some signings today. It's not like they were shut out or anything like that. They got Tanner Jeannot. They got Victor Arvidsson. Victor Arvidsson at one point was scratched in the Stanley Cup final.
He was trading spots with, who was it?
Skinner, and then there was somebody else because somebody got hurt.
Connor Brown also, I guess, was hurt a bit.
I just feel like, and this is fine by design.
Yeah.
Where we talk about, the Bruins are probably going to take a step back because of the guys they already lost. But it's I feel that they have guys on their roster. They kind of look like Seattle East right now. Where they, other than the fact that Seattle doesn't have a talent like David Pastrnak, and they do have Charlie McAvoy, but they have a lot of guys that are just kind of fine. They have some solid NHLers, but it's if you're trying to go up against Barkov or Austin Matthews or Kucherov and Braden Point in Tampa, you don't have the guys to hang with them right now. So then you say to yourself, okay, well, do we have enough guys to hang with Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle? Maybe not.
No.
Does your defense have a Lane Hudson, Noah Dobson? Well, you do have Charlie McAvoy.
You got a Hampus.
You got Hampus. So maybe you're on the same level as Montreal. But is that really what you want to be? No, you want to be the Bruins that are always near the top, and it feels like this year is not going to happen.
And I kind of agree with you. I don't think Boston's there. I think I'd put them in almost like a Pittsburgh category right now.
Yes.
They do have Jeremy Swayman, who had kind of a bad year coming off that contract.
Yeah.
But that being said, I don't expect them to be a playoff team. How about Chicago? They made a lot of moves last year, bringing in Tyler Bertuzzi and others that were going to insulate Connor Bedard, and make it so that
2 years in a row they did that.
Yeah, make it so that at least maybe they're not a playoff team, but at least they're taking a step forward.
Yeah.
Obviously didn't work out that way. Very quiet so far.
I was going to say the only thing I can see them doing is they acquired Sam Lafferty from I think Buffalo. Otherwise, you look at Chicago right now, and they only have 3 defensemen under contract. Alex Vlasic, Connor Murphy, Kevin Korchinski. They got a couple of RFAs.
Oh, they got Shea Weber as well.
Fair enough. As well, he's got to finish his golf game from the draft. Then you can find out if he's there. But yeah, and you know what? Maybe Chicago's just being kind of patient, and they don't want to overpay.
Like their best move right now is at the draft, where they got Anton Frondell, who's one day is going to be just a great guy to have down the middle
for sure. And I do like the combination of Bedard, Frondell, and then potentially Frank Nazar, unless you want to move him to the wing, which I know he hates. He wants to be a center. But it's a nice little nucleus to build around. You got Artem Levshinov on the back end, Korchinski as well. So they have pieces, but you're right. Like in terms of taking that next step, I don't see it right now.
Also surprised that Tampa didn't do anything.
A little bit, but
they always seem to find money under
I was gonna say
couch cushions.
I need to find out are they in cap hell right now?
Let's go a little kind of rapid fire style in terms of we'll just name a team and you tell me if the winner, loser, or maybe just
neutral.
Neutral.
Yeah.
Okay, Toronto.
I would say neutral.
I'm gonna say loser.
That's fair. I just don't know if
if you're gonna lose Marner and have that cap space, you got to use it somewhere.
Yeah, they still have the cap space. Let's not forget.
Let's use it.
It could be Ehlers.
Washington.
Loser. Yeah, simply because I think that they're going to come back to earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say neutral. Carolina, I'll say winner.
I'll say winner because of Keandre.
Yeah, I like that. Jersey?
Winner. Yeah. They didn't need to. I think them healthy, they're pretty good. And then they add those little tweaks that they did. I think that's helpful.
Ottawa, neutral?
Yeah, I'll say neutral. They're on their way up. So re-signing Claude Giroux, even though it was inexpensive, I think it was good for them because he's clearly well respected in that room and is one of the few old guys they have.
Okay.
Him and David Perron.
Montreal, I'm going to say winner just because of the Noah Dobson trade alone.
Yeah.
We'll see. And actually the Logan Mailloux one, I think Bolduc makes a lot of sense.
Bolduc is certainly ahead of Mailloux in terms of NHL, I was going to say readiness, but he's already played in the NHL. So, well, I guess he's ahead of him in that respect because Mailloux has typically been an AHLer.
Let's skip a couple teams. Or actually, let's go Rangers here. I'm going to say loser.
I'm going to say loser too, even though they got Gavrikov. They've just lost so much in the past. If
it was Gavrikov and they retained Miller.
Right. Yeah, to me, it's a bit of a lateral move.
Yeah.
Because of Miller's youth.
Buffalo Sabres.
Losers.
Yeah. What's going on there, Buffalo?
Kevin Adams. I got to ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think in the West here?
Well, I think Calgary, we might have talked about this already, but it feels like they're going to drop this year. It feels like this past season was a very nice story. Minnesota, we haven't talked about at all. I know they haven't done much, but they did get Vladimir Tarasenko.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me about that is that he's not the big goal scorer anymore. But when he played for Florida last year, he took on a bottom six role and he was blocking shots and he was very valuable in that respect. And they won the cup.
Yeah. Last one. Let's just say Anaheim. I think winner.
I would say winner as well.
Yeah. Chris Kreider.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah. And again, you could lose Trevor Zegras because you have Leo Carlsson coming up. Mason McTavish still coming up in terms of ascending. They're already NHLers, but they're going to be even better.
All right. Well, free agency doesn't end today, Ryan. It just started. So the rest of the summer is going to be interesting to see if some of these teams that we just deemed losers can turn it around and make some surprise moves. But that wraps it up for us and our free agency frenzy. We were on the air for 3 straight hours. Not a whole lot of moves, but we still managed to fill the time. We want to thank Rooston Sports headquarters for hosting us today, as well as Sticks.com. Trying to think if thank you to Jared Gray Owl Paddles, as well as Jared Ostra for manning Twitter/X and all social media channels. For the hockey news, that's Ryan Kennedy. I'm Michael Traikos. Continue to follow all of our coverage at thehockeynews.com, but We will see you next time.